on the stick stream, I guess technically a special on the stick stream, and I am here with the one, the only. He's going to be over here, I think. Over here. Yeah. Nope, that's the wrong way. He's over here. SmokeMonster. Were you just going to SmokeMonster, not Mike?
Yeah, that's good. Or okay. Mike, either way.
Okay, cool. So I wanted you to come on the stream because I am finally taking the plunge on getting an arcade set up in my home without getting an arcade cabinet. And I don't know anything about it. Yeah. Except for what I've seen in your videos and some stuff I've gleaned from different forums and Bob's videos from Retro RGB and stuff like that, but really, yeah, I don't know anything.
It's confusing to get started.
Yeah.
Luckily, though, you're jumping in at a really good time.
It seems that way. It's
because we're going to go on a big field tonight, you know, and covering all this territory. But really what it boils down to is that nowadays, this little thing right here, it turns arcade boards into consoles, and that's all you really need to know. And so all these little details that we're going to cover and the specificities and all those kind of things, they get really simplified by these new Superguns, which is really cool.
Yeah, that seems to be the case from what I've been able to glean. What do you know about the history of the... Okay, do we know where the name comes from? Because that is the worst name.
So, I have a theory about it. Nobody knows exactly. My theory is that there was an old... Because they used to make Superguns like for arcade operators and for like rich game collectors, you know, to plug your arcade boards in just like and play them on your TV. Mm-hmm. And my theory is that I think there was one in Japan that they called the Supergun, probably one of the very first ones, you know, as like a product name, kind of like Kleenex or something.
Right. It's the Q-tip of arcade connectors.
And other people have different theories. Some people think it's related to, you know, like there's guns in the monitors and things like that. But we don't really know. I think the earliest commercial one was the Capcom made one for the CPS-1, actually.
Yeah, right. The
CBS video and Super Nintendo controllers.
Yeah, the CPS changer.
Yes.
Yes. So you would not say that the Neo-Geo AES is not a Supergun in your estimation?
No, but I mean it basically is like they took an MVS and Supergunned it.
Yeah.
I mean it's technically, I guess, a console.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a console, yeah.
So this has been a thing for a long time, as you just said. Like, even if you don't include the the AES or the CPS changer, like people have been making these for quite some time. But I think what made them more possible was the JAMMA standard, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what makes this kind of doable in a meaningful way.
And I can show off what we mean by that. So. And I always, whenever I say standard, I say JAMMA standard, and I put it in quotes like that. Because the more you look into it, the less you'll see that anyone followed it as any more than like a suggestion of what they should do. And I mean, there are some games that are true JAMMA, like, got Double Dragon here. That's a good example. This is just your standard JAMMA game. And so your JAMMA is this edge connector, and it's supposed to be a standardized way to just plug any JAMMA game into a JAMMA cabinet. So you have all of your audio-video stuff is here, your controller inputs are here, and the power comes in here. And so the idea was that you could just slide this into any JAMMA cabinet and you'd be good to go. And it was a big deal for arcades back then because until then, a lot of the time, unless you were sticking with the same company or something, you needed a new cabinet for every single game. You couldn't just get one and convert it, kind of like they started doing in the 90s. And for Superguns, set this down. Superguns they take the JAMMA standard and they plug into it, and then they give you controller inputs of some kind. It doesn't have to be Neo-Geo, but here these are Neo-Geo. It gives you some sort of audio-video interface, usually RGB, but not always. some use component, and then like the Capcom changer was S video, and then you've got your audio and your power input. And so essentially, you know, this is like where you plug your power in on the console, you've got your controllers, and then you've got your RGB jack, and that's all it really does.
And your cartridge is this gigantic circuit board.
The gigantic thing. Or like this is a Neo-Geo MV1C that I'm working on right now for Mike Chi. It's much more like a console, in the sense that in the 90s, like a lot of companies, not just Neo-Geo, you know, Capcom CPS2, the Taito F3, the STV, Sega, and a bunch of others, they switched to, like, they would sell the arcade something like this, which is more like a console that they'd install in the cabinet, and games were no longer big circuit boards, they were cartridges for some of these systems, and so they plug in. Now here's your MVS, plugs in like that, and now with the Supergun on the front, it's an AES, like you said. It's essentially exactly 100% the same thing as an AES. If you switch this thing into console mode in the BIOS, it is an AES, essentially.
Yeah, in fact, I believe all the Neo Geo games except for one have both the home and arcade ROM in all cartridges. I believe Magician Lord is the only one where the actual AES cartridge is different than the MVS cartridge.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with, like, you can continue points or something like that. I don't remember exactly what's different, but I know that that's a thing.
And they would switch, like, from coin to select, things like that. Really little changes usually. And going back to the history of JAMMA 2 and Superguns. So Superguns have been around for a long time. And why I say that we're in a golden age now is because early Supergun designs were really starting to settle down, I think, by the mid to late 90s, and they never really changed since then. You have these designs that weren't necessarily made by video engineers and people who care about protecting open source scan converters and G-SCART switches and things like that in modern TVs. They were assuming that these were going to be used just on a PVM or something, or whatever they had laying around, maybe even an arcade monitor in their shop. And so a lot of the earliest Supergun designs now are very dangerous. In fact, I would say they're all dangerous up until the home arcade system came out maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Has it already been that long? I didn't realize that he'd been making those for that long.
I think he did. Like, I got in at like version 1.4, and he'd been doing it for several years before that, just small runs of his version 1s. So I think this is my version 1.4, and then I have a version, his latest version, hooked up to a PGM right now. So I am biased in this argument, as people they know. I'm going to make that clear. I think the Haas is the greatest Supergun ever made. But just like the Lamborghini Countach for a while was the greatest car ever made, or whatever, there are now...
Wow, spare you my thoughts on that, but okay.
These are my car analogies. Now we have some Ferrari Testarossas on the market, and we have, actually the Haas is more like a space shuttle, actually, in comparison to other Superguns. But the early Supergun designs are very dangerous now to plug into modern equipment, because what they'll do is they don't really do anything with the RGB or the audio. They just pass it straight off the board.
And it's the audio that's the dangerous part, if I'm not mistaken,
dangerous. Right? The sync can also be really hot on some, which can be a problem for some TVs. Not necessarily PVMs usually, though.
But it's the audio, because the audio is built for, like, those the dedicated speakers and cabinets and amplifiers. And so if you don't attenuate, I think that's the right word, if you don't attenuate the audio signal, it's way more of a charge, I guess, or way more amperage than your consumer stuff is expecting.
So, like, these are designed, like the Neo-Geo board is designed to plug into a cabinet where the speakers are hooked directly up to this sucker. So it's feeding out speaker-level audio, which you can imagine if you feed that into a line-level input on a TV or almost anything, it's going to either heavily distort it or just destroy the system, which is what it tends to do. It'll blow out... if you passed untouched speaker-level audio to a G-SCART switch, it kills it instantly.
Yeah, so there was a story about We definitely don't want to do that. I paid a lot of money and waited a long time for my G-SCART Switch to arrive. It's great. I love my G-SCART Switch. I have no regrets about spending $250 or whatever it was on it, but I definitely do not want to destroy it.
I mean, there's no reason on earth why if you were designing the G-SCART Switch, you would be like, oh, someone's going to plug speaker level audio into the headphone jack or whatever. Right. So it's not a fault of the G-SCART Switch. It's like a fault of the fact that most Superguns just pass that speaker right through, and RGB too.
Yeah,
and
so even
some of these boards have really really hot sync levels on them, which I think has been responsible for killing some OSSCs, and even some people have killed I've seen 2 PVMs killed over the last couple of years by Superguns passing. I think they were plugging in maybe the speaker level audio into something like this. My PVM 2030 here takes audio in, but not exactly sure. I mean, because usually you can feed pretty hot sync into these PVMs and they don't care. But yeah.
So I know that even some, we're going to talk more about Neo-Geo, and you can see on the screen I have this chart that you have posted a link to in one of your videos. But Neo-Geo stuff, it's not exactly a Supergun, but I know that a lot of people, initially there is a company on AliExpress that is selling consoleized MVSs, and everybody was like, this is so much cheaper than the Omega, or cheaper than the Analog. The Analog doesn't even make their old MVS anymore, the one that the wood casing and everything. And then I heard there's a guy on YouTube, a guy goes by the name of Mad Little Pixel, and he like blew out his OSSC hooking up this...
Yeah.
You know, and and that scared me, because at first I was like, that's pretty cool and pretty affordable, and then I heard the story about like dude blew up his OSSC, and I'm like, I got a FrameMeister that right before the OSSC kind of came into its own, like it existed, but it was still only doing, I think, doubling, maybe tripling at the time when I bit the bullet on my FrameMeister, and I'm like, I don't want to fry my FrameMeister with this, bootleg MVS, so that scared me off.
That's the C-Box.
Yeah.
And when I first saw those two, I was like, whoa, this is cool. But the C-Box is a really cool concept, but it's a really poor execution. Because what it does, it's doing the same thing. It's passing through the RGB and sync, and they used to do the speaker level audio too. I'm not sure if they might have revised that since then, because they're not killing people's systems anymore.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've heard. I've heard that either that now they're better, and also at the time, if you knew what you were doing, which a big part of why we're having this conversation, I don't, right? But if you knew what you were doing, there were some you could put in some extra caps, or you could change some stuff,
and the sync.
And then everything would be fine.
It's like they designed a Supergun and they don't know sync. Like that's how Supergun designs go. It's like you go back to the 90s, and it's like the people designing them, they knew how to get it to work on a PVM, but they didn't exactly know what they were doing. If that makes any sense. So like the C-Box was passing TTL level sync right off the board, and that was causing big problems for things. And but the cool thing is that there are 2 people right now working on basically making a perfected C-Box. So Tian Fang is making the Neo Micro.
I have some pictures.
Yeah, I sent you some pictures of that.
Just
and Porkchop Express is going to make like an all-in-one pre-set up Neo-Geo MV1C that basically is a C-Box, except that it has modern video amplifiers that are fully buffered, and the sync is regenerated and all of that. And the coolest thing about these is that they're going to be way cheaper than the C-Box too. So like this one is going to sell for like about $80. This is the Neo Micro by Tian Fang that's going to be out pretty soon. And what it does is it's like the HAS basically, except it's built just for a specific model of Neo-Geo, either the MV1C or the MV1B.
Okay.
And so it takes care of all the stereo problems. The Neo-Geo has a little bit off-spec RGB and sync. It'll fix that to the perfect 75 ohm level or whatever it is. And so it's just like a cheap thing. Like if all you wanted to do is jump in and get Neo-Geo, this is perfect for someone.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of other boards too that are similar enough to Neo-Geo that this thing would work for them really well, like the PGM that I showed off earlier. But he's going to also make a special version just for the PGM, because its stereo audio is a little different from MVS once you modify it. Can you
do me a favor? You were looking at the stream, right?
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor? Can you post a link to that MVS list that I have up there? Because someone in the chat saying they can't see the whole thing. because your face is covering it, but I don't want to resize you. So if you can post a link in the chat, that'd be super cool for people who want to take a look at that on their own.
Yeah,
So before we get too into Neo-Geo stuff and spiral this all the way out of control, let's I want to reel it in just a little bit. So getting back to the basic Supergun, that not a consoleized MVS. There are 4 or 5 Superguns that people like you and Bob say are trustworthy, that they won't destroy your equipment. What are those 4 or 5?
And you don't need to rely just on this list either. The question that you ask when you look at a Supergun is how it handles RGB, basically. Is it just passing it through? And if they don't tell you what it's doing, it's passing it through, basically.
Okay.
But if it says it has a 7374 or a 7316 video amp on it, it's taking the RGB from the board and it's putting a buffer between it and your output, basically. And that buffer is going to give you perfect RGB output, nice and sharp and clean. Oh, hey, Jose Cruz is here. Speaking of arcade stuff, he's a master of this kind of technical wizardry.
Awesome.
So when you're looking at a Supergun in the future, if there's more out there, like right now, the safe ones, and I haven't tested all of these, but like the Home Arcade System, HAS or HAS, you have the upcoming Sentinel by Frank, which is basically going to be like an Australian version of the HAS without auto fire options for the most part, and a different video and sync circuit, but it should result in about the same thing. So those are going to be the 2 kings for a long time. I don't see anything dethroning the HAS and the Sentinel anytime soon.
Okay.
As far as options go. But then you also have really cool things, like the one I'm most excited about is the minigun right now, which is an open source, really stripped down Supergun by Frank, which is going to do just controller and perfect video. So no auto fire options, no funny stuff at all. It's just going to be a cheap little, incredible, perfect video device that you can plug into any arcade board, basically, and have a nice Supergun, and it's not going to be break the bank. You know, it's going to be like $100. And the biggest thing of all is it's going to be readily available once the design settles down.
Yeah, there are already people making a guy who goes by QC Retro makes them, and he's been posting on Twitter and stuff that he's got, he's selling them here and there. And he also, I want to finish your piece about which 5 are safe before we kind of go into the details of which is which, but I believe QC Retro is also making a 3D printed shell for the minigun so that there's not just like an exposed board out there, which is cool as well.
Yeah, the pacifier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about the Supergun because the thing about the HAS is I love it to death and everything, but it's only made in usually 2 batches a year. It's very expensive, and you have to wait, 6 to 9 months to get it. And the Sentinel isn't even out yet. And these are they're so complex, and they're hand-designed, so it's always going to be that way, pretty much, until you get something like the minigun that's open source, and people can make a batch of 100 of it and sell them, and have them in stock somewhere.
Right.
Something like that.
And so then there are 2 more, right, which are a little older than the ones that we've discussed so far?
Then there's the Parsec Supergun, which is basically, I just haven't seen it in person, so I have no idea. I've seen what it looks like on paper and everything. It looks pretty good, but I just don't know. I haven't seen anyone hook that up to a scope or anything yet.
Okay.
And that's it, actually.
I feel like Bob vouched for that one, but I don't know if he actually put it on his scope or not.
I think Bob said the same thing I did. Yeah, that we both looked at it and it looks good. Like it has, it's definitely safe. There's no question about it. It's safe. Everything is buffered with video amplifier and everything.
Okay, so those are
just whether or not it's as good as the HAS and all these other things. I don't really know.
Okay, so those are the 4 that are safe.
And I never mentioned by name unsafe Superguns. I never have. The only one I've ever ripped on was the C-Box, and that's because it's made in China, and I never have to worry about them
trying to come after you.
Who knows who even makes those things? There's like 50 sellers.
Yeah, but the one claims to be the original Time Harvest official store or whatever. I actually had a really bad experience on AliExpress, and now I'm super hesitant. Like, I bought a GDMU on AliExpress, and it didn't work. And I initially thought that I was doing something wrong, that it was my fault, that I feel like I'm all thumbs when it comes to a lot of this stuff, which is ironic because my day job is and has been doing end user support for software and technical stuff.
Well, so you're just trained to always blame the user, even if it's yourself.
Well, okay, yeah, fair enough.
That's how I am.
Yeah,
really.
There you go. Fair enough, right? So I'm like, this is something I'm doing. It's my fault somehow. And finally, I just I did what I would normally do in any troubleshooting situation with anything I've done in my day jobs. Anytime I took every component out, put the original. Because I did there's a video, there's a stream that's up in the streams playlist on the YouTube channel, but I did it live on the internet because I thought it would be fun. I took out the power supply and replaced it with the Chris 2600 board for the help me out here.
It's the Pico.
The Pico PSU. Because I wanted to get one of there's a guy who makes custom power supplies for the Saturn and the Dreamcast, and I kind of wanted one of those, but he had a problem where there was something got held up in customs and he couldn't make them for a while. And I was like, well, I want to do all this stuff and I want to get it done. So I got the Pico PSU set up instead. So I got the Chris 2600 Pico PSU. I ordered a bunch of stuff from Greg Collings from Laser Bear. And I did all this stuff, and then the GDMU didn't work. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Like, what did I mess up? So I took everything, and then it was like one component at a time, doing everything, try a different memory card, put the disk drive back in, take the power supply out, put the original power supply in, put the disk drive in. The disk drive works. Okay, take the disk drive back out, put the GDMU back in. It doesn't work. Like doing all this, and then finally got to the point where I was just like, it's the GDMU. Like it must not be working. So I looked around at people who'd said like, yeah, there's this one on Amazon. It's more expensive, but one, it'll get there to you in like 3 days, and two, it works. And I was like, sounds good. So I ordered that one, plugged it in, put my memory card in it, and like worked a charm first try. And so then I would go back to the AliExpress guy, and I'm like, this thing you sold me doesn't work. And they're like, try this. I'm like, I tried everything. They like send us pictures. So I'm taking pictures of the thing with the blinky light.
They're just
and then
I'm trying to wait out the 40 days.
Yeah, and you know what? I didn't. It's fewer than that, and I didn't realize that. And so by the time I was done with them, and I was like, no, dude, I'm just opening a dispute. I went to open a dispute, and it was like, well, you're past the time when you can open a dispute. And I was like, you sons of bitches. So now
AliExpress is really scummy like that.
Very.
The sellers know all those tricks.
Yeah, very, very wary of them. And actually, somebody recently said, oh, hey, somebody's selling drop-in replacement screens for Neo-Geo Pocket Colors. And I was like, nope, not going to do it. And I was like, well, it looks pretty cool. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'll wait until who's the Australian guy who's working on a replacement screen for the NGPC? Ben Venn.
But I know what you're Ben Venn, yeah.
Ben Venn. I was like, I'm just going to wait for Ben Venn to put his out there and buy one from him, because I'm not doing AliExpress again, because I got fleeced out of $70, and I'm not. Like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not doing it. Unless it's, never spend, for me, it'll be like Kickstarter. Never spend more than you can stand to lose if I'm going to. So if something's like a honey of a deal on AliExpress, maybe. But, like, bad experiences there. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm thinking about the minigun to sort of get over my AliExpress rant. I'm thinking about the minigun. And the reason is because you kind of suggested it to me, but my thing has become, because I've made small mistakes that end up, I feel, costing me on the other end. Like, at one point I was like, I'm going to buy a Super EverDrive because I don't know if I really need all the stuff that's in the SD2 SNES. It's only another 20 games or whatever. And now I'm like, I should have just got an SD to SNES from the beginning, because like now I wish I could play Vitor's Gradius 3 SA1 hack, for example, or I wish I could check out, like, I'm not super into the idea of playing Super NES games with CD music like that. Those kind of mods don't appeal to me for a variety of reasons. I get why people are into them, but it would be cool to just like check them out, have fun with them, and I can't do any of that. And so now I'm like, I should have just gone from the beginning. So can you explain to me in kind of layman's terms, like you already mentioned the price is, quite a bit different, but if I get a minigun, what am I losing from the Has or potentially the Sentinel if I go with the minigun? I should
say first, I'm going to get a minigun.
But you already have a Has, so
I have 2 Has, and I'm still going to get a minigun. Mainly because, like, one day I picture myself having a setup where, well, I'm only going to end up with one of these Has in the end, too. So one of them eventually will go. But I want to have a setup where I have a horizontal and a vertical screen. So I need 2 Superguns.
Oh, yeah, that's legit.
And so I can do that right now with these 2 HAS. But the minigun, basically, so the HAS does all... I can tell you... First, I'll tell you everything that the HAS, the home arcade system, does. It has, like, auto-fire options. You can reprogram the buttons. The auto-fire options are actually really nice. You can do them, like, you can set them to your own pace, or you can even have it set to the refresh rate of the sync.
Wow.
You know, like 60 frames per second or whatever, which is really good for arcade games.
Never lose a grapple and 3-count bout again. Actually, you probably still would lose a grapple and 3-count bout because that game cheats.
Yeah. And it's good for carpal tunnel if you play a lot of shooters, you know, where they don't have auto-fire option. But it also has, you can reprogram the buttons, which is nice for arcade games, and it saves that too after you power off, so that's kind of cool. It has the most advanced sync circuit of any Supergun, which means it's going to have, it's like I have 56 JAMMA-ish PCBs right now that I own, and it works on every single one that I've ever attached it to. So, like, when I built my own Supergun to begin with, I spent like a year doing it. I've told this story before. I followed the schematics, which are basically what everyone uses for something like the C-Box. You know, it's a pass-through. And I even added like a sync cleaner circuit to it, LM181, and all this stuff. And in the end, my Supergun was compatible with about 40 to 50% of my boards.
Wow.
And on the other ones, it either didn't work or it was so off that I couldn't fix it through just adding more pots to it or whatever for RGB or for the sync.
Okay.
So you will have, like, basically, if it's JAMMA, the HAS will work with it, and the Sentinel is probably the same way. The minigun, it's not quite as advanced of a sync circuit, but it probably will be like 99%. So in that respect, it's going to be fine. It's going to be super compatible. It's like a 7.3 if you get the minigun advanced, and there's 2 versions. It's just there's like a simple and advanced, and the only difference is that the simple, it uses through-hole components for people who aren't so good at soldering, who don't want to mess with hot air guns when they put it together. And it's 7316. It's a slightly older amp that's not quite as crisp and sharp as the 7374, whatever the advanced uses.
Yeah.
So essentially what the minigun is, it's like a HAS without any of these extra options. So it doesn't have, if you're not going to, I mean, and you can get auto fire too. You can use like a JNX Spitfire, which is a little auto fire board that plugs in. Or if you can just live without those remapping and stuff like that, like the minigun is where it's at. It's
so
just
how is it gonna map the buttons how does it decide how the buttons are mapped?
So it is going to use the exact same button mapping that the HAS uses, which this is the next little part of our rant here that we can talk about.
Okay.
So first let's talk about the different versions of JAMMA, because there's standard JAMMA, which is ideally what everyone would have been using when they're making JAMMA. But they quickly figured out that JAMMA only supports 3 buttons.
Right.
And so then you got JAMMA Plus, which is like JAMMA plus an extra button, 4 to 5 buttons, so plus 2 buttons potentially. And then you have CHAMMA, or Chinese JAMMA, which is like what they put on the Pandora's box. It just raises its middle finger at everyone and says, I'm putting 6 buttons on here, where you guys are putting an extra ground or whatever it is on the standard JAMMA.
Well, but didn't Street Fighter 2 had his JAMMA, and that had 6 buttons, right? 7 if you count start button.
So those games they'll use JAMMA, but with a kick harness for the extra buttons.
Okay, so I hear people use this term all the time. What is a kick harness?
So the kick harness is this extra little thing here, and it's used to add extra buttons basically to a game or extra players. So like a 3 or 4 player game could have a pretty big kick harness on it to add in enough controller inputs to support more players. But so the most common use of it is like CPS2, so Street Fighter Alpha, games like that, or Mortal Kombat that has 5 buttons. They said, we're not going to do JAMMA Plus, we're going to do JAMMA plus a kick harness. And the kick harness just plugs in, and in the cabinet you would wire that up to the extra buttons, basically. And it's really nice with the HAS because, and I think Frank uses the exact same type of kick harness too. When you order your Supergun, you just need to decide if you're going to use games that need extra buttons to get the kick that you need. And I standardized everything to CPS2 kick harness. So even if I plug in like my Sega STV, which is technically a CPS-1 kick harness, I have an adapter that I got from Gemination X that takes it to CPS-2. I have a Mortal Kombat 1, I have a Tekken 1, a Namco System 11 and 12. So basically my advice is to just say, I'm going to do CPS-2 if I ever need extra buttons. And then if I get a board like Tekken that's non-standard, I'll buy a $15 adapter for that, instead of getting a whole new kick harness for it that's just for the Namco.
Okay, so if I didn't actually explain, this is all your fault, because the reason that I'm actually looking into finally doing this and getting this is, well, twofold. It's half your fault. It's twofold. Part of it is one is really my fault. I have a very large collection of video games. That is, I have whatever 1,200, 1,300 video games, about 1,100 physical cartridges and discs, and then a bunch of downloads that don't really count, I guess. But it's all over that. You can't really see it. I guess I can kind of turn this and you can kind of get a good. It's all in the corner there. Those shelves are all video games, and then there's actually another shelf on this side of me that there's more games over there.
So you didn't go the storage unit hoarder route like I did?
No. I want to have the reason that I have a collection.
Nice. Yeah,
is that I want to be able to decide I want to play a game and grab it off my shelf and play a game. But now with flash carts and stuff, like there was a time when I started collecting games again, when I started getting old games and not just the current stuff, which was towards the end of high school, early college, is when I got an NES again, and then I got a Super Nintendo again, and then I got a Genesis again, and then I just stopped, kind of purging my PS2 collection as I just sort of kept those games and for a while games were so cheap. Like at that time, I worked in a game store in college, and all our NES games were $5 unless they were like a very popular thing that someone would pay 10 for. So there was a while where I was just like, it was just consumed.
Yeah, that's what I did when I built my initial console collection. It was just like, you saw them and you're like, how can I not buy this?
Right.
It's $5.
Right.
It's a game I played.
But now it's like, I paid $5 for Mega Turrican. I paid $5. This is a great example. I paid $5 for the Genesis port of The Punisher like 10 years ago.
Nice, yeah.
Now it's worth like $100. So
yeah, I got my Game Gear collection almost completely from 2 or 3 for $1 sales on Fridays at the game shop that I used to go, and my whole Atari 2600.
Right. I live across the street from a fire station, so I apologize for the sirens. But so I'm like, if I ever feel the need to play Punisher on Genesis again, which since I've already made a video about it, the likelihood is pretty slim because it's not a very good port. I have a Mega EverDrive, and that cartridge is just taking up space on my shelf, and I could get... And for some people, if you're a big comics fan, like that is an interesting thing, but I'm trying to get from more quantity down to more quality and things that are interesting and things that I personally think are cool. Like, I would sell that copy of Punisher or trade someone that copy of Punisher for a copy of... Texas Chainsaw Massacre on Atari 2600. Now, like, Punisher is not a good port, but it's probably a better game.
Great game, by the way.
Yeah, it's probably a better game than the 2600 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of my top 5 favorite films of all time. I find it to be incredibly chilling, and there's a novelty for me that someone made a video game. That Charles Band, of all people, made a video or had a video game made of this. Charles Band, of course, is now known as the guy who owns Full Moon Features, which is like the Puppet Master series, Ginger Dead Man, Evil Bong, all that stuff. That's Charles Band. He used to own a company called Wizard Video, and he had the VHS distribution rights for Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I'm still not clear on if he got the video game rights or if it was so Wild West in like 1981 or whatever that he just made video games because he had the VHS like home rental distribution rights or whatever. However that happened, but like that's the guy who published those games.
I like that you get to play Pigface in the game. You're not running from him or whatever. You are him.
Right. Yeah. You are Leatherface hunting down Sally and her friends or whatever, and like Franklin's wheelchair is in the way and you can trip on it. And but the Halloween you play as Laurie Strode, but those things are more interesting to me to have that and be able to talk about it and have a conversation piece. And I actually passed up a copy of Texas Chainsaw for about $80 a couple years ago, and I regret it. Probably not quite as much as I regret. I was in a game store in Phoenix, Arizona about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was talking to the dude who owned it or ran it or whatever, and we were, kind of shooting the shit, and I said, he was the one, he had a Custer's Revenge, which I was like, I don't think I need that in my life, but, it's a conversation piece. He was like, you want something really cool? I'm like, sure. Random video game store owner, show me something really cool. He's like, I got a copy of Pepsi Invaders. And I was like, bullshit. And he was like, no, man, I opened it and checked the board when the guy sold it to me. Like, I made sure this is a legitimate copy of Pepsi Invaders. And I was like, okay. He fired it. He let me play it. Like, I've played Pepsi Invaders on a real card on a real at 2600. It's not very good, but he's like, I kind of want to get 800 for it. I'd probably let it go for 600. And at the time, I really couldn't justify that. But now I'm like, it probably was worth paying 600 for a real, legit, verified copy of Pepsi Invaders for the 2600.
Yeah,
but
I'm that way with arcade games because I've been collecting so long that, like, when I started, they seemed expensive. And everybody said they were expensive. Like, oh my God, Simpsons is $150. Are you kidding? That game's not like, like $150. Come on, I could have bought Simpsons back then. I bought a lot of those kind of games. I splurged on X-Men. I have a big Konami collection is what I collect. The only one that I don't really have is Simpsons. But with arcade games, it's the same way. Like, the days where you could buy a working copy of Simpsons for $150 or whatever are long gone now.
Yeah,
you're getting up to like $400 broken territory nowadays.
Right. And for me, I have so far with all this game collecting I've had, I've never paid triple digits for a video game ever in my life.
Yeah, me either.
That's the point. That's the point where I bulk really hard. And like I just said I should have paid 600 for that Pepsi Invaders, but that's a severe outlier, both in its value and in its rarity. It's one of those games that is actually rare and also very desired, so the price is like kind of justified. Mm-hmm. It's not one of those games where it's like, people are still trying to get $40 for Contra or Super Mario 3, and I'm like, you're insane. Like, that game is
the most common game on earth.
There's millions of those.
With Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in arcade world, it's got to be the most common game on earth. I mean, I swear to God. You saw like 10 copies of that in every city in the United States.
Right.
But somehow it still goes for like $300-400 nowadays or more.
Yeah. So that's the part that's not your fault. Is I decided I want to cure. I'd rather sell. I'm going to start trying to kind of sell off some of my just large quantities of games that maybe I'll only get $10 or $20 for, but then I'll be able to use that money to fund what we're talking about tonight and buy, like the Jag SD is up for pre-order right now, and I've kind of always wanted a Jaguar to just cover it on same name different game and be able to talk about Jaguar ports, because that time frame is really interesting to me. Like when there's games where there's a 32X version and a Jag version and a Super Nintendo version and a PlayStation version, and it's like what weird cross-section of time did we exist in where all these versions of these games came out and these systems are so different from each other. And I'd like to get that kind of stuff, and even just stuff that's more common that I just don't have. Like I have Friday the 13th for NES, but I'd like Nightmare on Elm Street for the NES, not because I think it's a great game. I think it's a great soundtrack, and I think it gets more hate than it deserves because it is the only 4-player side-scroller on the NES. But I love, like, A Nightmare on Elm Street is also one of my favorite movies. The original, New Nightmare, Part 3. The game is pretty much based on Part 3. And so the novelty of this horror movie game that was made for Nintendo when, the NES was really marketed as a system for children, as a toy for children, that's so out there.
Like, your Punisher gets you almost maybe halfway to the Punisher CPS2 game.
Right.
Or CPS 1.5 or whatever.
Right, because that's Q sound. So So that's the right. So that's the part that's not your fault. The part that is your fault is I'm on your Discord. So full disclosure, I support SmokeMonster on Patreon, and I'm on your Discord, and you know that I am a wrestling fan, that I was an indie wrestler in a past life. I have put on the boots and the trunks and stepped in the ring, and you sent me a message, and you were like, hey, man, a dude on the Arcade Projects forum is selling a board for WWF WrestleFest. And I was like, how much does he want for it? And you were like, I mean, is it poor in poor taste to talk about how much you wanted for it, or is that
no?
Okay.
No.
You said
it's a really good deal. That
you said he's asking for 90, but you might be able to talk him down to 80 because it's been up for a little while. And that is one of my. I just have a ton of nostalgia for it. I love Technos. I love professional wrestling. I love Kurt Hennig, who is playable in that game. Like, there's just a whole bunch of stuff going on for me with that particular game. It's one of my favorite 90s arcade games. And I was like, all right, I guess I got to make him an offer. So I went over, I said 80, and he's like, I don't know, man. I'm trying to, I'm already selling it for less than I bought it for. And I'm like, I was kind of trying to impart to him, like, I'm not a guy who's trying to flip this. Like,
you're trying to convince yourself to buy it, basically.
Right. I legitimately love this game. I'm not like going to buy this and then try to sell it somewhere else I'm going to put it on eBay for 200 because that was my big thing. I looked on eBay for what people are trying to get for them on eBay, and they're like 200. And I was like, man, it's coming to a good home. I'm a fan. It's not about that. And so he sold it to me for 85, shipped from wherever he is to Nashville. And so now I have an arcade board. And so now I need something to play it on.
And the reason I recommended that to you, I have it too. I got mine. I bought it untested a long time ago for really cheap. And it just turned up, and it's one of those games that it was untested, but it just worked fine. So I recapped it, and I'm not super huge into wrestling, although I was back then. And when I plugged that game in, it's not it's like there's a lot of wrestling games out there.
Yes, and a lot of them are bad.
Arcade games, and they aren't so great. Yeah, I mean, but this is a game where every person who I've brought, even people who don't who just remember WrestleMania VHS tapes and stuff like that from the time period.
Right.
Ultimate Warrior era kind of stuff.
Right. Ultimate Warrior, Gorilla Press.
They love that game. I mean, it's just a great game. In addition to the fact that it captures that era absolutely perfectly.
Yes, the ring gear. They when they come down to the ring, they're all wearing their proper gear for ring entrances. Legion of Doom has the spiked shoulder pads, and Kurt Hennig is holding his towel. He doesn't spit his gum out and like hit it, but it's like Jake carries the bag with Damien in it over his shoulder.
It's my favorite back then. Yeah. For some reason.
And all that stuff, and it like that they did a really great job, and console games weren't doing that. Even that when you play through the tag team story mode in that game, it's all the different shows. You wrestle on Wrestling Challenge, and you wrestle in a steel cage on Saturday Night Main Event, and you wrestle, and it's like it did so much better than any home wrestling game at that time at actually capturing the feel of the programming. And also Technos games of that era have a look, like their art department had like a style that you see it and you're like, why do these wrestlers look like Double Dragon enemies? And that's because they were drawn by the same people. And it's so I grabbed that and I'm like, well, now I need something to play it on. So that's the part that's your fault.
And it's a great board because it's pure JAMMA too. There's no nonsense. It's not a board that's really problematic or anything.
Well, now what if I want to play 4 players, though? What do I got to do?
So what you need to do is, there's actually someone, I can send you a link, on Arcade Projects who makes a 3rd-player and 4-player adapter.
Okay.
I built some myself. But it's just like you take a DB15, let's see.
Which is a Neo-Geo, these ports right here that I'm kind of, I don't remember, I might have hidden my mouse, so you might not be able to see that, but
and you just adapt it basically into like a controller dongle. Like I built some for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that work on all my Konami boards to get 3rd player and 4th player. So that's what you do for
so they plug into the board, like the board has a control. I haven't actually opened the board yet, so
it has like a big JST connector. And I'll send you a link, actually. I should have done that earlier, to the person who sells basically the wire harness that plugs into that.
Okay.
And then you just wire it to a DB15, or I think they would even do it for you for a little extra. But it's not an issue for me because I have no friends. Like I'm lucky to be playing with like one other person usually. But yeah, I have a bunch of those.
I know that feeling.
Konami games.
Nice. So that's different than the kick. The extra player harness is separate from the kick harness. The kick harness is just for more buttons. The thing you're talking about is for extra players.
Yes, but it gets fuzzy because you could make a kick harness from like WrestleFest into the Haas, and then let's see, how would that work? Does the Haas? I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't because it doesn't have enough buttons for you. So yeah, no matter what, you'd have to make your own controller dongle. Okay. The Haas gives you like up to, let's see, like 8 or 9 extra buttons, I think, is the limit here. So that wouldn't be enough for a full extra player or something.
Okay. So, and the minigun, it will do the same. The kick harness
I think
port connector is the same. Okay. And so, when I order from whoever, I would just say like...
Actually, just looking at that picture, I can see that Tian Feng is using the same kick too.
Okay.
Looks like.
And I would just say like, I also need a kick harness for CPS2, or would I just buy? Is that something I just buy from Arcade Paradise Shop or one of those places and just
buy
like
it
get
from whoever you get your Supergun from? Is my advice. They'll probably carry it, and if not, I can hook you up with links to people who sell them.
Okay.
But yeah, I used to tell people, get the kick harness for whatever boards you think you're going to need. Just get it up front. But now I just say just get CPS2 and use like JAMMA Nation X adapters.
Okay.
And he makes them for basically everything.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of part one of the early stuff of what I wanted to cover. Now, we're talking about the mini...
Where we were going with that, though. So we covered the JAMMA, JAMMA Plus, and CHAMMA.
Yes.
But then
sorry, I derailed you really badly back when you were talking about that.
I just remembered because we're talking about DB15. And then you come into the next fun part, which is the fact that even though... Let me pull these little covers off here. Even though all these different Superguns usually standardize to DB15, which is Neo-Geo. So when we say Neo-Geo, we're talking about this thing, the Neo-Geo, or the joysticks
the big
that came
joysticks
out for the AES and the CD. Unfortunately, because there's all these different standards for JAMMA, there's also a bunch of different standards for the DB15 connector. But like I said at the beginning, luckily for you, the Haas, the Minigun, the Sentinel, Tian Feng stuff, they all have standardized to the undammed layout. So you don't have to worry about any of this, basically. It's like all taken care of for you. No matter what you plug into the DB15 on the front, it's going to be like laid out pretty well.
For anybody who might be watching this who doesn't know who Undammed is a guy, I believe, a person,
I think so,
who makes the Infinikey, right? That's the main undammed product, I believe.
The Infinikey, and then he's most well known probably for the undammed USB decoder.
Right, that's what I was just going to ask. So because this is undammed, if I want to use my arcade stick, which is a USB arcade stick that I ripped open, it's a Mayflash USB arcade stick that I tore open, and I replaced everything. I replaced the buttons with Sumitsu buttons because I like the flat. I actually wanted concave buttons, but only Hap makes them, and they don't fit right in these kinds of sticks a lot of times without cutting, and I didn't want to deal with that. So I got Sumitsu buttons with a flat profile, and then I got a bat top Sanwa joystick, an octagonal gate. Like I made it the way I want it, the way I remember. Yeah, and so if I get the undammed USB decoder, plug it into my minigun or my Sentinel or whatever, and then plug my arcade stick into that, it will work because it's on the undammed standard already. Okay.
So the undammed dongle, I don't have one here with me, but it looks like this, except that it lets you plug in PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox 360, or Xbox One, any of those joysticks. And then most, I think, just general USB joysticks work with it too. They just let you plug it in to your Supergun and use it with arcade games. And it's like, the lowest amount of lag imaginable. So there's no like conversion problems with it.
Nice.
And like this is my favorite one for the undammed. It's, LS56, Octogate, Real Arcade Pro.
Nice.
And that is probably actually because a lot of people early on would like to get these Saturn adapters.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too.
Controller. The only problem is they're hard to get and they're expensive. They were about $30 each plus shipping. But there's more options coming, actually, from Tian Feng and others pretty soon if you want Saturn. But otherwise, the undammed is like the ultimate, really, because it covers so much ground. And there's so many great joysticks nowadays, way better than... I love the Virtua Stick, but it doesn't compare to a modern stick, really.
Right, especially if you replace all the parts yourself. You know, if you put like the Mayflash one when I got it, like, and that was the thing. People were like, "Well, the stock parts suck," and I'm like, "Well, I don't care if the stock parts suck because the point of buying it is to take the stock parts out and put in stuff so that it's the way I want." I got the red bat top joystick, and the button colors are Neo-Geo MVS, you know, color layout. It's 2 rows of MVS colors, you know, because that's what I want. That's how I wanted it to be. And I put a higher tension spring in there than the standard, because American arcade games, they had the bat top and the octogate and the spring that it was like a door stopper when you pulled the thing down and let it go. Okay. Yeah, right, exactly, just like that.
There's a hap, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what I went with, and that's what I'd like to use. So that's cool with the undammed thing. So that alleviates one of my concerns.
Yeah.
So. But now I get into the weeds on this stuff, and I just don't know, you know, what's going on. So I had some questions for you. One of the things is I saw that the QC Retro was saying, I've got a couple of these miniguns. I can sell them right now. He said he's got a 1.5 and a 1.7. What's the diff? Do we know what the difference is? Incremental update?
The thing is that Frank is famous for he'll do one little thing at a time with his designs. I love the guy and everything, and he's doing this for free, so you can't really complain.
Right.
But usually,
but people on the internet sure will, I bet.
Yeah. By the time you buy something from Frank, there's usually a new revision. Mm-hmm. Like I got one of his really nice, beautiful, actually the greatest ever made JAMMA extensions when he first came out with those, and I think there have been 10 revisions since then. And now it's this whole like system with plugs and ribbon cables and all sorts of crazy crap. But so like version 1.5 to version 1.7, I don't think there's really a huge amount of difference, but you might as well. 1.7 is the current version, and by the time this airs next week, it'll probably be 2.0 already. And the only main difference of the 2.0 that he's doing is he's adding a voltmeter, and then he's spacing the controller ports 2 millimeters further apart so that you can fit 2 undammed at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Because you can fit them on the 1.7, but they're like really squeezed in there together.
So then is QC Retro going to have to redo the pacifier to match the design of the new?
He's going to he has the, I mean, it won't be hard for him, he said. Oh, he's here right now.
Oh, nice.
He or she, I don't really know.
Yeah, actually, I don't know. I shouldn't assume. I don't know.
They are here.
They're here, yeah.
We assume they're men because that's all we see.
Yeah, because when you're a big dork about this stuff, the chances are better than not, which is not, I mean, it's not always the case, but, you know.
It's not like one of those sexist things like in the greater world. It's like, it really is like everywhere you look, it's guys for some reason. Yeah. But, so QC Retro said it's going to be easy to update his design.
Okay.
To, he just has to move things around a little bit, but he's got that beautiful pacifier design going. He or she, sorry.
So we talked a little bit about the minigun versus the Has, and I'm looking at the notes. I made notes, and then you answered my notes, kind of. One thing that we didn't mention, and I see the note, so I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it so that everybody watching gets the answer. How do I connect my minigun or my Has to in my case, to my G-SCART switch, which is then going into my FrameMeister? Like, how do I do that?
So, what you need, it's really easy actually with either one. They're just slightly different. So the minigun is going to just use a Genesis 2 RGB cable. Okay. When you're done. So if you already have one of those around, you've already got it. And it works with HD Retrovision cables.
I mean, I do, but it's plugged into my Genesis 2, so
yeah. So you
I'm going to need another one. So if I just go to retrogamingcables.co.uk, which is who I tend to go through, but I did actually at the Cincy Classic, I actually met the lady who does the cables for
that's who I buy mine from, is Retro Access.
Retro Access.
I bought from her just since eBay times, back when that was all she did.
Yeah.
It was on eBay. Yeah, they're really good.
Yeah, but either one of them, right? That seems to be the general opinion, is like either of them is totally legit. She's very shy, but she is very sweet, and her husband is very nice, and we hung out at an arcade bar in Cincinnati with Corey and his wife, and there are a whole bunch of folks. With the guy who does the guy, the Screaming Villains guy who ported all those old Sega CD games to modern consoles. I cannot remember his name, and I feel like a jerk. But he was there, and Eric Grider from Game vs. Game, and like we all hung out at this arcade bar. So she's good people, and I definitely like retro gaming cables. Is just
and Insurrection too now makes cables that are supposed to be really good.
Oh, nice. So any of those, I just get a Genesis 2 SCART, and that's it for the minigun. Is that also the case for the Haas?
No.
Okay.
But since we're talking about, let me just show it there. Come on. Since we're talking about her cables, she also, one thing people don't know is that she'll make any cable on Earth that you can describe in detail to her. Uh-huh. So, like, the Haas uses a mini DB8, mini DIN 8, mini DIN 8, sorry, which is what so everybody always wanted to standardize, like, oh, we're going to standardize first SCART. Everybody's going to standardize to SCART. And then everybody standardized to mini DB9, like a Genesis 2. And then there was a big push to standardize to mini DIN 8. And so everybody started doing that. So the Haas is a mini DIN 8, which is the same as what people use for NES RGB mods. And so if you get the Retro Access NES RGB cable, it has no components in it. That's the difference between the two. Is that the Haas is designed for a no component cable, whereas Frank's stuff is always designed just exactly to Genesis 2, so it needs components in there. Okay. But like she made me this sweet, because I had decided to standardize for some stupid reason to the Neo-Geo gigantic Denny. And so why? I needed to. I don't know.
That's also the PC Engine. PC Engine too, right? PC Engine and Master System are like also.
It uses a C thing in the middle instead of the round one.
Right.
Yeah, so I've standardized too many times, and so then I decided to standardize back to the Mini DIN 8, and she made me an adapter to go from that to the Mini DIN 8, and it's really nice. Nice. And I've used this forever, and it just basically lets me use my custom cables with my Haas.
Cool.
So to make a long story short, Frank stuff, so the Sentinel minigun is Genesis 2 and HD Retrovision cables, and the home arcade system is a componentless cable. And I think you could use an adapter and use some HD Retrovision cable with it for one of the systems. Like probably their Neo-Geo cables would work with it because they don't need components.
Okay, that's cool. So, power supply. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We haven't lost anybody, have we?
Yeah, if anybody in the chat is like, there are some questions in the chat. I'm kind of trying to hold them to the end. But if anybody has questions, please do ask them, because by the time we're done, I do actually want to go back through the chat and like bring up what people are saying. But I'm also trying to add,
like as Sainrub said in the chat comments, I am brushing everything after JAMMA under the rug here. I'm like the JVS, and
I'm not even trying to worry about that yet.
We don't need to worry about that. Because we're just talking about JAMMA stuff, which is really 99% of what I own is JAMMA.
I mean, because for me, I guess I should to explain again, because I want to be able to post this video. The archive of this is going to go on YouTube, and I want to be able to point people to it and be like, I am an idiot. I do not know anything about anything. And I tell that to my wife all the time because she is a lawyer. And so I am always like, she's like, read this brief for me and tell me if it sounds good. And I'm like, I am an idiot who knows nothing.
Where my wife has a PhD and is always making fun of me.
Yeah. My wife doesn't make fun of me, though. She's like, read this brief that I wrote. And I'm like, I can tell you if a comma's like in the wrong place. But other than that, like, I don't know anything about anything. So so I don't know anything about anything. And the point of this conversation,
I've just dabbled in this stuff long enough to build up a little database of concepts that I've gotten from other people.
Sure, but that's enough. That's enough for me. So that's the point of this whole thing, is that I can say, I don't know what this is, please explain it to me, and you can explain it to me. So my next thing, the thing that has been a mystery for me, because there are so many conflicting reports, and I tend to trust people who say, this is the safe thing, this is the smart thing, even if it is the expensive thing, this is the thing you should do, versus the people who go like, it doesn't matter, like, you could just do this other thing for like it works. Yeah. I'm always like, So the power supply situation.
Because that's the first thing you're going to get responding to this video, or people are going to say, I use X crappy Supergun and it works for me.
Right.
And what people don't understand is we can't recommend that because, like, you have a G-SCART switch.
Yes.
Most people don't have a G-SCART switch, but some people do. And every single person who has one could get their G-Skirt Switch fried.
I would not want to. I love my. I think my wife actually likes my G-Skirt Switch more than I do. Like, it came and I took it out of the box, and I ordered it when I still lived in DC, but we knew we were moving to Nashville, and so I put in the address in Nashville, knowing that it takes super G a while to make them. And then I got bumped to I was at the very end of that batch. Actually, I was past the end of that batch, so I got bumped to the next batch, which was fine with me because I was just like, I'll get it when I get it. It's fine. But I was so tired of switching SCART cables every time I changed. In DC, in DC, it wasn't that big of a deal because we had so little space that most of my game systems were in these cabinets that are behind me. They were in them then, but they were in baskets. They weren't hooked up. They were just shoved in there. And then when I wanted to play something, I would go get them and I would bring it into the bedroom where my my computer and my FrameMeister and everything was, and I would just hook them up and use them one at a time. But one of the things I really wanted when we moved, and now we have so much more space because it is infinitely cheaper to live in Tennessee than it is in Washington, D.C., all my systems are hooked up at the same time now. That's awesome. I can flip on and I'm ready to go at the drop of a hat to play Genesis, 32X, Sega CD, Saturn, Dreamcast, 360, PC Engine, it's all ready to go.
Is so infinitely more better than my setup that it's funny that you said that you're an idiot, because I literally can do one thing at a time here. And I've never had a solution to doing more than one thing at a time. I mean, even though I have 40 or 50 consoles, probably, I still, every single time I have to unplug them and reorganize and, run cables like a maniac everywhere.
Yeah,
it's just pathetic.
I decided I was not about that life anymore. But the question is, who is the idiot? Because I spent $300 on the G-Skirt Switch. I spent how much money on furniture? I've spent how much money on...
Yeah, but your house is organized.
Well, so. That's true. But when I got the G-Skirt Switch, to end that story, my wife looked at it and she's like, that thing is pretty. I'm like, it's an electronic component. She's like, but it's a really cool looking electronic component. And I was like, okay, fair enough.
No, she's a keeper.
Yeah, for sure.
She appreciates the quality.
So so I don't want to hurt that
hardware and thinks those things to herself. She definitely doesn't say it.
So I don't want to hurt my equipment. So let's talk about the power supply, because you say, and you have said repeatedly, I'm on
an island. And okay, so I'll explain the power situation, and it applies to everything on Earth except for Tian Feng's stuff, because Tian Feng is adding a buck converter to his designs. And I think maybe Pork Chop Express might be doing this too, which is the only time on Earth I'll ever say that it's okay to not use an arcade power supply. But in every other case, so what a lot of people do, and what I did to start out, you read, okay, my arcade board needs 5 volt and 12 volt, something like 2 to 3 amps, 5 volt, and 1 amp of 12 volt. And so you're like, oh, well, there's all these laptop power bricks that I can get with that. Or I can convert a Neo-Geo so that it doesn't even use the 12 volt. It's just 5 volt. It's relatively easy to do, and that's fine. And so then you get these ideas like, oh, I don't need this. See, here's an arcade power supply. It's not the prettiest thing on Earth, although your wife might appreciate it. I think it's pretty awesome. It's solid metal, gigantic capacitors, massively over-engineered, and it can power an entire cabinet, monitor and all. So this thing they're nice. And so people think, well, I can do a shortcut, and I'm just going to use a laptop brick that's 5 volt, 4 amp, because it says it's 4 amp on there. And you do that, which is what I did. I had one of the nicest ones ever made, the Alt SC200, I think. It's 5 volt, 4 amp. It's a massive thing.
So is there a place to plug that in on the thing? I've used this word processing program that pops up ads, so I have Prince Charles' face in the lower right-hand corner. I apologize, stream, for that. I don't know. That's really annoying. Anyways, so were people stripping the wires at the ends of these laptop bricks and wiring them into the Supergun, or is there a port on the Supergun where you just plug it in?
Make an adapter. You can just put a barrel plug, and you could even use it with the Hass, and people have done that. Or you can even use a computer power supply, an ATX power supply, and you can bodge that in here.
So there is a barrel connector on the side there that just...
There's not, but you can make your own.
You can make it,
easily.
okay.
You can just hook a barrel connector up and plug it into here.
Okay.
Or make it an adapter for an ATX power supply. But I have been around long enough, and I do this online support thing, that I do where I respond to people's problems online on forums and stuff, and on the Discord. And I'll tell you what, when somebody has a problem with an arcade board, who I can tell is relatively new, I'll ask them, what power supply do you have? And invariably they'll say, well, I'm using an ATX power supply that so-and-so told me is fine. Or I'm using a laptop power brick, but it's fine because I modified the Neo-Geo to only need 5 volt. And the problem with that is that these power supplies, no matter what they're rated, I mean, there are some good ones. There's like triads and things like that you can get from DigiKey. But what they do is they introduce tons of video noise, first of all, using a laptop brick on a Neo-Geo. So I used to have tons of video noise, and I just thought, arcade stuff is dirty, because this was like one of the first things I ever got was not this one, but like a 2-slot. And now after a few arcade boards, I noticed they all had that noise. I stepped up to just some, I got the cheaper option, because these arcade power supplies are like $30 shipped. This is the Mindong, which is the one that QC Retro recommends, MD9916A. He maintains 170 arcade cabinets at Arcade One up in Brisbane, Australia, and this is what he puts in them. He's not putting, and except for the Naomi or the ones that need like 3.3 volts, where those require something more expensive. But this or the HAP 15 amp is the one I've always recommended to people, and
that's like $35, right?
Yeah.
So it's like $20 more than a laptop brick.
Yeah, or cheaper even than some of the things that people use. Like some people are putting like $100, $200 computer ATX power supplies in because they think, it says right here on the box it's rated to 30 amps, 5 volt. And then they plug it in and it can't even power a Neo-Geo. And it's like, what's going on? Well, it's because they're rated in fake numbers. They're rated at their maximum current for like a quarter second or something. They can't produce the type of power that we need and as clean as we need.
Now, the thing that has me worried about these legitimate arcade power supplies that are built to sit inside of a wooden cabinet is that I have a little dog who is extremely cute and extremely friendly and extremely stupid.
Yeah, I know you're going to. So what you need is...
but there's a 3D printed... yeah.
There's a cat protector, so you don't have an exploded cat on your floor when you come home or whatever. Because you do have, if you just have your bare wires plugged into this thing, you have line level voltage here, 120 or 110 or 220. That'll instantly kill your cat, and it'll hurt your hand pretty bad too, I imagine. But they make 3D printer covers for these, or you can go totally nuts like I did. Let me show you my setup here. So. My power supply was back before they had really 3D printed parts. I don't know if you can see it here. There's a HAP Power Pro Ultimate, which I modded the hell out of.
Yeah.
And it doesn't produce 12 volt until there's a draw, but it's totally enclosed. And the wire, I use an XLR jack because I was a musician and I like that and I thought that was smart.
Nice.
But it wasn't actually, though.
No? Okay.
I had to... Then I discovered about negative 12 volt later, which is another thing that's important. The arcade power supplies do that your other power supplies generally don't produce is negative 12 volts, which...
See, now you've gone completely over my head. Like, how is voltage negative? I don't understand that.
It just is. I mean, I've asked smarter people about this, and they just say it kind of like... I mean, if you put on a multimeter, it says negative 12 volts. I mean, it's not like a negative, like your negative terminal. It's minus 12 volts. But some games use that mostly for the sound.
Right, because you did a stream of Double Dragon a few weeks ago, and you were saying that people post them, they post them as sound not working, and it's not that the sound's not working, it's that they have Superguns that are not set up to properly do negative 12 volts, I guess, which is where the sound comes from.
Yeah, and so that's a really good way to get... If you make a mental note of all these negative 12-volt games that need it, you'll start seeing them show up on eBay, and they'll say, no audio. Well, if there's a negative 12-volt game that has no audio, to me it means that's a fully working game, and you can get it at a bargain price because they think it's broken. They just don't know to hook it up. And Double Dragon and Primal Rage are two big ones, and Time Killers.
Time Killers is not a good video game.
No, I got it for like $20 though, like shipped. I mean, you can get if you buy arcade boards broken. When you get into that zone, you can start getting really hot deals on stuff, and sometimes they actually show up just working.
Yeah, you've mentioned that before, that some people say untested or broken, and then you get it and to plug it in and it works. So they were doing something wrong. They were using a laptop brick.
It's the only time ever on eBay that untested actually means that there's a potential that it actually works. Because everything else on eBay, if it says untested, it's guaranteed it's broken.
Yeah, it's broken. They just don't want to say broken, but it's broken.
And it's probably the case with most arcade boards, except that you luck out sometimes.
So what do I have to do with it? Because I saw some videos, some tutorials of like setting up your Supergun, and like there was one of this dude, and he's like, he hooks up the thing to so the wires, you like strip the wire and you wrap it around the thing and you screw it in, right? Or whatever.
The right way to do it is to crimp on a terminal, like you might have used for car stuff.
Yeah, okay.
Terminals. Just put one of those on it and then screw it on. And then put your 3D cover over it. It's pretty simple.
But then he's like turning the dial somewhere. Like say that it reads 5 volts.
Another reason to get an arcade power supply versus anything else is because Double Dragon is a great example. Somebody told me recently. So when I plug in Double Dragon to my arcade power supply, it powers up. Like if I had a Neo-Geo on there and it was at 5 volts, I power Double Dragon on. It's at like 4.78 volts. So it's way too low. But arcade power supplies have an adjustment for 5 volts here. And that's why having a voltmeter is nice on your Supergun, is at the JAMMA edge. Not where I had it on mine. It's totally meaningless except for just making sure that you're generally close. But what you get is like for Double Dragon, I have to turn the 5 volt way up, like a quarter of a turn, to get it to where it's reading actually at 5 volts, just because it's a power hungry little monster. The CPS2 multi setup is kind of like that too.
So if
you're using a laptop brick or an ATX power supply, they do not have adjustable 5 volt.
So what happens if double?
What it is.
So 2 questions on that. Do both the minigun and the Sentinel and the Parsec and the Has all have a voltage display that will tell me that?
Yeah, I think all of them do. Yeah,
okay.
Except you can add it really easily actually too. Like if you get the 1.7 minigun, it's just you get these for $1 on eBay, and you just solder it straight to the port, the plus 5 volt and ground on here, and then you have a multimeter or a voltmeter right on your board at the JAMMA edge, which is important. So
then my question is, what happens if you run Double Dragon at 4.78? Does it run even slower than Double Dragon is kind of known to run? Or?
It's probably fine. It's within the 10% variation range there. I think it's going to be okay, but it's not okay with CPS2. With CPS2, like if you load up, and this is why a lot of people in the beginning thought their multis were broken. If you fire up a CPS2 at like 4.8 volts, everything's screwed up. The timing is off, things glitch, it doesn't really work. And it's a really power-hungry board, too. And so if you don't have an arcade power supply, you're just screwed. Sorry.
So that clinches it for me, because another big part of this is I don't know that I necessarily want to go whole hog into collecting individual boards, but my plan is to get probably a minigun based on what you've said so far, and one of these HAP power supplies, because that sounds like the way to go. But what I really want to do is, and we'll get to I think we're going to start talking about Neo-Geo in just a minute here, but I also do want to one of the things that made me sort of start considering that maybe a Supergun was a good way for me to go was when Darksoft put out the CPS2 multi, because then I was like, some of my favorite games of all time are on that standard on that system. And the idea of, find a donor B board and you hook this thing up to it and you can play every single CPS2 game legit, not an emulation, not a port, the real thing. That for me was like, yeah, man, that like those D&D games are some of my favorite arcade games. Alien vs. Predator is one of my favorite arcade games. Saturday Night Slam Masters, not the original Slam Masters is CPS1, I think, but Muscle Bomber Duo and Slam Masters 2 Ring of Destruction, I believe, are both CPS2.
And you have Dimahoo on there.
Yeah, Dimahoo, right, and Giga Wang, 2, maybe 1 and 2 for sure. And
Yeah,
you know,
basically, the CPS2 is totally... Yeah, I'm glad that you appreciate it, because a lot of people, like, Neo-Geo is the crap, you know, it's awesome. But, man, CPS2, in my opinion, wipes the floor with it. And that multi is really cool.
Yeah.
It's definitely one to put on your list.
Yeah.
If you were in arcades in the 90s, basically, the CPS2 was a little powerhouse.
Oh, yeah.
And there's all those awesome games. Really high quality games.
The first Marvel versus Capcom, like a bunch of fighting games that are, and again, like because I do this YouTube series about comparing these games to their ports, I would really like to be able to reliably say, like, okay, I mean, the Saturn is always touted as this like arcade perfect machine, and it probably is, but like let's actually look at this game running on JAMMA and see, like, are there any frames missing from the Genesis version or the Saturn version? How close is the Saturn version of Vampire Savior to an arcade, CPS2 version of Vampire Savior? And that's but also, again, just to experience
for sane people, it's fine. But for you who's doing the video, or for arcade enthusiasts, there's no... It's the real thing. It's the real thing versus a port, you know?
Yeah, and like you said, like the CPS2 and the Neo-Geo, like I've lately really been really admiring the sprite art of that era, because I feel like as we were transitioning into 3D as a sort of gaming culture, it's weird because people who are younger now, and this isn't me being like, back in my day, but like people who are younger now, I think, don't realize how looked down on 2D games were for a period of time. Like in the PS2 era, and the PS2, GameCube, Xbox, memory,
essentially.
Yeah, like you had it was like Game Boy Advance and then DS to a certain extent. That was where you played more traditional 2D games. That's like stuff like Ninja 5.0 on the Game Boy Advance, like, and games that were coming out. I mean, occasionally you got stuff like Alien Hominid or Beautiful Joe, which is technically a 3D game, but like, they cel shaded, so it's trying to look like a 2D game, right? You occasionally got those, but like way by and large. And now that once we sort of transitioned into the 360 era and the sort of indie game revolution that we are really appreciating now, where stuff like Hollow Knight comes out like semi-regularly, but like for a while 2D gaming was just not a thing, and it started with the PlayStation 1 and the Saturn and the N64, but the games that were 2D,
arcades, really.
Yeah, in a lot of ways it did. And the games of that era that were doing 2D, especially on the Saturn and the later Neo-Geo stuff, like those games are amazing looking.
Yeah, they're the height. It's like we reached the peak and then they just killed it.
Right.
Like instantly.
Like Real Bout Fatal Fury Special is like the Sistine Chapel of pixel art. Like that game
Garo,
moves.
Mark of the Wolves.
Yeah, and you just look at these games, the animation is so detailed, and it's 240 lines of resolution pixel art, but it just looks phenomenal. And that went away in a really significant way for a lot of years. And now, thankfully, again, with stuff like Hollow Knight is a great example. Like, Hollow Knight is gorgeous. That's an amazing looking game. Or I'm trying to think of like other recent, like Blazing Chrome, which really goes back to that style. Blazing Chrome
Shovel
is
Knight too,
Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight looks great. Like Shovel Knight looks a little better.
Really,
yeah, Shovel Knight looks a little better than an NES game could actually look, but it's convincing, right? And like Blazing Chrome is going for that Genesis vibe, but it kind of tips over a little bit into this Saturn sort of style with some of the parallax stuff in the backgrounds and stuff the Genesis really probably couldn't have done. And
what's also hard to imagine is that AAA. I mean, those are AAA games in 2D in the Saturn era.
Right,
it's hard to even think of like giant teams of like the best in their field getting together and working on this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Because nowadays you think, they're making an open source world for Grand Theft Auto or something, But back then it was like, no, they're just making some really, really good looking 2D games, powerhouses.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about the Neo-Geo a little bit, because that's the other. So I want the CPS2 kit, and I want to do Neo-Geo, and part of this is inspired by a video you did quite some time ago, that was about what we're talking about tonight. But you were sort of saying like people consoleize MVSs or they get a consoleized MVS, but like it's not that much more expensive to just get a Supergun and hook an MVS board up to the Supergun, and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But you can also do CPS2. I can also play WrestleFest. You can also do all this other stuff. So
so what you face at the beginning is, and it's changed a little since then, because since then, Jose's been talking about in the chat a little bit, is there are these specific Superguns now made for specific systems, like the CPS2 and CPS3 digital mods are really cool. And those are just, going to work on those one individual systems. But what you face is a lot of people, they're like, okay, let me pull up mine here. And I did this too. I mean, my first Neo-Geo, I partially consoleized it, and about halfway through, I got a Supergun. But they'll take a Neo-Geo, and they'll put, you can add controller ports here on the front, if you want your controller ports. You can add an RGB jack here on the side and attenuate it, and then I have a stereo mod in here, so you have your audio. Then you add a power jack to it, modify it to only 5 volts, and you can plug a laptop supply in, and you've got a console. Then essentially what you have is an AES. Mm-hmm. But that's a lot of soldering. And in the end, all you can play on it is Neo-Geo, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you put a lot of work and money and time into doing that, when nowadays this does the exact same thing. The difference is that I can take this off and put it into WrestleFest, ever made, and every single one of them it consoleizes. So this is for someone who wants to get into the hobby of arcade games. Consoleizing is for someone who might only want if you're like, I just want Neo-Geo, you might consoleize it, or it's a little different now though, because like Tian Feng's solution, which is Neo-Geo specific, I'm gonna get that for mine, just because I think it's cool to have a device that's specifically tailored to like one of my favorite consoles. And I'll probably do the CPS2 digital mod one day, once I work up the nerve and convince myself I can do it, because it's pretty in-depth.
Right.
But I just kind of like the idea of things that are specifically made for specific things. But I'll never chop up again another Neo-Geo myself, because it's just, there's no point to it.
Right. So I'm looking at my options here. Now, you made a video again recently. You sort of, I'm going to call you out a little bit. You kind of clickbaitedly titled it a $35 Neo-Geo, which is partially true.
That was on purpose, yes.
Right, of course it was. It was partially true, because the Neo-Geo board itself you can get for $35, but then you need a Supergun and all that stuff. But when we're talking about doing this, so my questions around this. So I'm gonna get a flash cart. I haven't decided which one. They both the Darksoft and the Terra Onion seem to have their pros and cons. I don't know if I want to.
They're both absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Everybody always asks me what I would, for recommendation, and I always just say, just look at the spec sheet, and it's just a personal thing, because they're both absolutely incredible at this point.
So I tweeted at Terra Onion the other day to say, like, hey, you've got this Pro for AES. Like, what's the vibe on the Pro model MVS? And they said probably October. So my question now though is, I don't. Like I said before, I've bought cheaper EverDrive type solutions, and then kind of regretted it because I didn't get the full feature set. And so there's a part of me that's like, I should just get the Pro Terra Onion, because now it supports Neo-Geo CD games.
Yeah, definitely. If you're going to get the Terra Onion, get that Pro for the Neo-Geo SD and that super fast loading and stuff.
Yeah, and I know that there's only a handful of games that got CD soundtracks, and I know there's 2 or 3 games that were exclusive to the CD and never came out on cart, either MVS or AES. Is that right?
Yeah, and
it's like Ironclad 2 and Cross Swords 2 and Samurai Showdown RPG.
Yeah, Samurai Showdown is the only one that you can't get working, I think, on the Samurai Showdown RPG, whatever, it's Storm of Spirits.
I have it on, I have it on Saturn, so it's fine.
The other 2 have made their way to carts now.
Oh,
through,
so
prototypes showing up on like the Wii.
Right,
thing.
the Wii.
People ripped it out of that. You can put it on a real cart and get on MVS. Okay. But
all right.
To me, another cool thing that you'll appreciate, because you like technical stuff, is that some games like Baseball Stars and Baseball Stars 2, they the CD and the MVS and AS versions are all exactly the same, except the MVS actually has kind of scratchy audio. I think it's like 22 kilohertz or something like that. Whereas the CD, gives you full Red Book quality audio.
Right, yeah,
in most cases, I prefer the chip tunes. In almost every single case, I prefer that over the orchestrated or CD version. But for Baseball Stars 2, what they did is they just took the MVS version, they recorded it from a really high quality source to CD, and then they put it back in the game. So it's exactly the same as the cart version, except it's not scratchy. It's like twice the resolution.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like the sample rate on the vocal samples is also like sounds a little better. Yeah. I want to say, or something like that.
Yeah, the sample rate on the regular Neo-Geo isn't so good, even though it has really good sound hardware in it.
Yeah, but the question becomes like, is that, especially since you just said all those games that aren't Samurai Shodown RPG are available on cart now? Is that is Samurai Shodown RPG and like some slightly better audio, or the interestingness of the sort of Red Book audio, is that worth an extra $200 or $250? And I'm kind of thinking like maybe not.
That alone, maybe not. But there's other stuff that you get with the Pro 2. And if you're going that far in already,
yeah, I mean that's true.
It's that deal with the Super EverDrive versus ST2 SNES.
Yeah,
but it's no matter what. Yeah, it's a huge decision. I mean, that's more than I spent on my last Fiero I bought. It was $250.
Yeah. So I don't know. I haven't reached a decision on that yet, but that is my plan. In fact, my plan is to go directly. I have a little bit of money squirreled away. And that I've been specifically saving for large gaming purchases. And like I said, I'm probably going to offload some of my more common games just to shore that up. So, I'm probably going to skip the 161-1. Like a lot of people, it seems like they are like, well, I'll get the
here though.
Sure, yeah, no, absolutely, because you made some labels or had someone make some labels because someone with a hologram printer or whatever.
I invented these hologram labels, which are actually just laser. It's laser printer paper. But so the 161-1 is much despised in the world because the early versions of it were
garbage.
So what this is this thing has 161 Neo-Geo MVS games on it for about $50 shipped. And you're like, whoa, that's the greatest deal in the history of the earth. And it is. Even the crappy old version of it, which has all sorts of problems and stuff, like 50 to 60% of the games on it worked perfectly fine. And what you could do to the old one, there were all of these fixes. You could add voltage regulators, put all the caps in that were missing, fix a major problem with the audio circuit, and you could get it to about 75% being perfect. And then you're like, wow, that's like $15,000, $20,000 worth of games.
Right.
But the new 161-1s that they're selling now have all the fixes applied, and it's a brand new PCB layout in here. It's really good. The catch is it still has the original shitty ROMs that they used. Oh, sorry.
Right. No, you're fine.
Right, keep it clean. It uses, unfortunately, they don't have it it's like they have a hardware person, but they don't have a software person. So it's still the original ROMs from the original one, and about 25% of them are broken.
Well, a bunch of them are like crappy hacks, right?
Tons of them are crappy hacks. Anything with a plus after it is. And so what it is for $50, it could hold you over until you decide on which cart you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm...
A lot of stuff like, it can be at your house in 2 weeks and you can be playing games once you get an MVS or whatever. Yeah. And it's cheaper than even the cheapest MVS game on Earth now, like Puzzle Bobble or something.
You can't still go to Akihabara and get like $5 copies of Fatal Fury 2?
I think those days... I think it might be $50 the minimum, or $100.
Yeah. So getting an MVS. Let's talk about that, because I've had this chart up the whole time we've been talking, except for when I had the Tianfeng thing up for a little while. But I've had this up for most of the time. So the one that I've looked at that I'm kind of like, that seems like a reasonable thing for the cost that I'm seeing it for me personally, is the MV1FZ looked like the one that I was like, that seems like a reasonable purchase. And apparently also it's sometimes known as the MV1ACH or something as well. I've seen it labeled as. But you say, I think you said the C is your favorite?
So I really like the MV1FZ, and all the MV1Fs really are nice. They're just really big. Mm-hmm. So, and they're also really early. which is a.
Oh, those are the earlier ones. Okay.
Yeah. So and we still don't know. I mean, I'm still curious to know those might still. I mean, we have things like MD Fourier now, where you can analyze the audio quality off things. Like I want to see if those early ones might have higher quality audio or something than newer ones. Like that's still a question is out there. But like I started off with my Neo-Geos. I got them all dirt cheap and broken and fixed them. I got like a 2-slot, then a 4-slot, and then my one and true love is my 1-slot. And I have since sold off my 2 and 4 slots for a fortune. An absolute treasure chest full of money. And I just settled on this MV1C, which you can get the one. So the only difference between the 1C and the 1B is that the 1B loads out the front and the 1C loads vertically. So if you like, those are the two that I recommend, mainly because of the price, but also because the 1C, they were made in like 1999, and it's like the most reliable of the Neo-Geos of all of them. It's the most simple of the PCBs, so there's less to go wrong. And the 1B, it's the same thing, except it was made like 96 to 97, so a couple years older.
Okay.
But the 1FZ, the nice thing is that I think that has controller ports on it. Oh no, it doesn't. Some of the 1Fs do have controller ports on the front, which doesn't really matter if you're going to use a Supergun, but It's kind of nice.
So what's the deal with the stereo monos? Like the one thing I don't fully understand about the Neo-Geo is how the audio, the games were in stereo, or
yes,
some were not in stereo, period?
The games are stereo.
The games are all stereo.
Some of the boards are stereo. So some of them, if you look through all those revisions,
the MV1FS looks like it's stereo.
Some have stereo. Some have line level jacks on them, and some of them it's really easy to add that without doing much. With the one MV1B and 1F, it's mono speaker level output only out the JAMMA edge. And so what you really need to do is disable that whole circuit and just pull the stereo directly off a chip here. Which is basically line level, but it's a little low, and that's why, like on Tian Feng's, he has a nice op amp on there to boost it back up to line levels. I've always just grabbed it straight though myself, and it sounds pretty good. Could be a little better, of course, but it's a very simple mod, and Gemination X has that up on their site how to do it.
Now, if I choose not to do that, at least to begin with, the Supergun is still going to do its thing since it's coming out the JAMMA edge. It's going to attenuate the audio, and that's not a problem.
Yeah.
It's just going to be mono.
It's just mono. Okay. It's mono line level and a tiny bit crunchy just from that high to low conversion, that attenuation. Okay. The other thing is you don't actually have to disable all of this like I do. I do that just because it's not really needed. You can just tap it, just solder 2 wires to this chip, and you have stereo audio to a jack or something.
All right.
On the 1B and 1C.
So the other reason that I'm kind of interested in the 1FZ, and this is going to lead to my next question, which somebody actually mentioned in the chat, is the 1FZ is socketed for the BIOS chip, which means that if I want to put in both a Unibios and a Neo SaveMaster, and I'm going to have you explain what both of those things are in a second. But if I put those in, then I don't have to solder anything because I don't have a soldering iron. I'm not comfortable with soldering. I feel like I will invariably ruin my equipment if I even try to solder something. So the idea of just being able to pop out use a little flat screwdriver to nudge the chip out, pull it out, put the Neo SaveMaster in it, and then pop the the Unibios 4.0 socketed chip right back in the top and be good to go is very appealing to me.
Unfortunately, there's one kink in your plan.
What's that?
So the Unibios is really easy on that one because, like you said, it's just a socketed chip that you can take out and put in. But the 1FZ, if you look on the if you look at the MVIC memory board support, it doesn't have a memory card on it. So there's no way for you to plug in the SaveMaster.
So I thought that he made one that snaps into the contacts on one of the chips on the board. Like I watched a video of it. FZ? Yes, I believe. I don't remember if it's the FS or the FZ. It might be a different one. I'd have to look at it again, I guess.
What you're talking about is the Neo BIOS Master VMC, which I have here. And it piggybacks onto a chip here, and then it gives you a socket for your BIOS, and then it adds save support to a system which doesn't support saving, which is cool. So any of these that say memory board support, no, they never supported saves. So this gives you save support. And yeah, actually now, essentially with the Neo BIOS Master VMC, if all you have to do is remove the original BIOS. Unfortunately, you said you're not that into soldering.
No.
Although I could explain how to use a hot air gun to get this sucker off in 30 seconds to you, if you were interested in that.
Okay.
But once you remove this, it just snaps on now. There's not a single wire that you have to solder now.
Nice.
So you just snap that on. You got save support and your Unibios.
Yeah, and that's so. All right, so you explained what the Neo Save Master is a sort of an internal, and that guy who makes those makes a number of models. For the ones that do have memory card support, you just slot it into where the cards would go.
I used to have those.
Yeah,
Brian Harper makes those at NeoGeoFanClub.com.
Yeah, but it basically almost every game supported the memory card, and all it really does is just say like what level you're on for the most part, except for like Baseball Stars. It's like
there's an interesting. If you look into the AES, there was this thing they wanted to do where some of their Neo Geo cabinets had a memory card reader on them. And the idea was that you would take your memory card home with you, and you could continue your game in the arcade at home. And obviously, this is borderline insanity here.
Right, because if you had a Neo Geo home system, there was no way that you were going to put your quarters into an MVS while you were out and about.
Put every quarter you owned into the AES already.
Right. Yeah, right, exactly. So
but it was there, and some games do support actual like save features, but for most of them,
Baseball Stars 2, I think, like will track like a whole season or a league, something. It'll track all your players and your past games and stuff, but
for the most part it's just high scores, which nobody really even needs.
Well, I feel like for some game, like stuff like again, Magician. This is the second time Magician Lord's come up in this conversation, but like I think Magician Lord, it'll save what level you're on, like what stage you're on. But most games it's like the high score table. But along with that, we were talking about the Unibios. Now, the Unibios, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the Unibios is it lets you choose, because as we said towards the beginning, which is now an hour and a half ago, so I forgive anybody who either just joined us or doesn't remember. The
innocent fools.
You sweet summer children. On a Neo Geo cart, again with I believe the sole exception of Magician Lord, every MVS and every AES cartridge has both versions of the game on it, and I believe every region of the game on it, and it's the system that decides if it's going to load the AES or MVS version and which region it's going, but it's based on settings in the BIOS of the system,
the dips,
the dips.
Soft
and so
dips and hard dips.
Right, and so that's how it decides. And again, except apparently in the case of Magician Lord, which apparently they only flashed the home version ROM to the AES cart, and they only flashed the arcade version ROM to the MVS cart. But I am 99% certain that is the only game that is like that. Every other game, it's all regions, and both arcade and home versions are all flashed to the chip inside the game.
For example, like that opens up, like you can buy your Japanese region games like King of Fighters 2001, and it's the American game. Once you put it into the US region or Europe, and vice versa, King of Fighters 2000, you can put it into the Japanese mode and have bouncy Maya and stuff like that.
Right. That's a thing you need in your life.
Yeah. You want all the sprites of animation.
That's true. All the frames of animation, even if they're kind of pervy. Yeah, so and some games have additional blood and stuff like that, and like I think some of the Samurai Showdowns, there's like additional gore in the Japanese ROMs, which is weird because now Japan's like reversed on that. Like the Japanese version of Resident Evil 7 is considerably less explicitly violent than the American version. So I don't know what happened in Japan over the last 25 years, but it's the tables have turned apparently.
It's because we're number one.
So, we can go with that. I mean, I don't, but flash carts, as I understand it, can override that internally. So if I'm getting a flash cart whichever version I decide to go on, is there a compelling reason to also get a Unibios?
So they'll the people selling the flash carts will say you don't need the Unibios now because of that, because you can switch the region like from the menu or whatever and that kind of stuff. But actually, I think it's still, I mean, it's cheap enough and it's easy enough to install that, yeah, it's worth having, because what you get is a nice, in addition to all of those options that you can get to when you boot it up, you can hold down buttons to get into the system options. You can also, it's an in-game menu that pops up in-game. You just hold down 3 buttons, and you can do cheats through there. You can do a soft reset through there, stuff like that. And cheats and hacks. So certain games you can unlock extra characters and things like that. It's kind of nice.
Okay.
But then also the Unibios, because you're going to buy the 161-in-1, like I suggested, the new Unibios 4.0 has this pick and mix feature, which is actually pretty cool. Because one of the things that sucks, also in addition to all that other stuff that I said about the 161, is that the menu isn't alphabetical, which the games are like sorted kind of into genre groups, kind of, and then some just aren't.
Right.
And you also have to reboot to get to that menu. But with the pick and mix option enabled, it's an in-game screen that pops up with just a list alphabetical of all the 161-in-1 games, and you just go down to the one you want, and it instantly boots straight into it, which is cool.
Okay.
That's kind of a cool feature too.
Yeah. And it's only it's like $40 for the chip when you order the chip.
Yeah, and you're buying a lifetime license too when you buy that. So like I bought my Unibios back in like version 2.0 days, and I get updates from its creator Raz. He just emails them to me, and I have a guy who burns chips for me for $1. Oh. And so I've got lifetime updates since then, even up to version 4.0, which is cool. Nice.
Okay, so basically, if you're spending all the money to get into all this stuff, you may as well spend the extra $40 to get the Unibios.
The thing up to me about the Unibios is if I didn't have it, I might not know what the deal is, but having it, it's like it's built into your head to go in there sometimes to do things with these button combinations. And even that's why a lot of us like to add it to Mister even. It's just because like if I have Neo-Geo there, I want to pull up the Unibios and do some stuff that I know is like turn the blood on or bouncy my or anything like that, or auto fire and some shoot 'em ups, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So now that's a lot of the stuff that I wanted to cover in terms of like the sort of broad strokes that I think a lot of people will be interested in. I think a lot of people are interested in Neo-Geo. I think a lot of people are just sort of mystified by the whole, how do I get arcade stuff running in my home? And I think a lot of people are like me in that part of what made it appealing was Darksoft in particular doing a lot of this. So we talked about the CPS2 thing, and that conversation is going to be, I think, a different conversation for a different day, because that is something that I'm going to do down the road. I'm focusing on cheaper stuff to start with.
Yeah.
As silly as that sounds, but like getting a B-board for a CPS2 and then getting the kit and then getting that, like, that's all very, very expensive.
You're going to be $400, $500, $600 in by the time you get that set up.
Which sounds absurd, but when you talk about how, like, a board for Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold alone would probably cost, what, $300?
Alien versus Predator is easily $500 nowadays, I'm sure.
Yeah, so at that point, it's like, well, I mean, $600 to get Alien versus Predator and all the Street Fighter Alphas and...
Not to brag, I got my CPS2 set up really cheap because it had broken pins, which is a really common thing with the first versions of it. Mm-hmm. The pins for the thing would break, and I got it in, and I actually sent it back in to Mitsurugi W, who's like Darksoft's sidekick, and he fixed it for me for free.
Oh, nice.
And then he sent it back to me, and they broke in the mail another pin. And so then I sent it back to him, and then he fixed it again for me for free. So they have pretty good support too.
Nice. And so do you have the Darksoft kit for CPS2?
Yeah, I have CPS2. Mm-hmm.
Now he also
actually did the audio updates to my board for me, which was really cool because the original ones had a little bit of a fuzzy audio issue that they fixed later. So he put it's like a 50-pin chip. He soldered that on there, which is cool.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was nice. I love it. CPS2 multi is the ultimate.
Yeah.
No question to me. Like I have the STV, their MVS, the CPS2, and CPS2 blows them all out of the water just because of the games, not necessarily because of anything the multi does in particular. It's a very bare bones multi. There's no graphical menu or anything. It's just an LCD thing. But yeah, we can come back to this one other day if you want.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too deep into that because I've already had you here for an hour and 45 minutes, and I don't want to keep you here for 3 hours.
I'm happy to
But they've done, as you said, they've done others. So they did STV, which is the Sega board that was modeled off the Saturn, or the Saturn was modeled off of that board. Yeah. They have done a kit for what's the Taito board?
F3. I have a F3 motherboard, but I don't have the multi.
What are some notable games for that board?
Mr. Driller, I think, is on there. What is Taito F3? I don't know. You can see why I don't have one. It has really good games, though, when I looked into it.
Okay. And then, is that it?
Elevator Action.
Oh, nice. I love Elevator Action.
Yes.
Elevator Action Returns or original Elevator, or both?
I think Elevator Action Returns is STV, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
Right? Or was that just Saturn?
It was on the Saturn, so that seems like it's at least possible that it was on the STV.
Yeah, it's probably Elevator Action Returns, I bet. Is it F3?
Right. So for me, I would have to save money for a while to be able to afford all of these different Darksoft kits and all of the base boards that they plug into and everything, but with the cost savings on saving up for those and then deciding to get them, and again, like I said, I'm going to get the CPS2 is going to be the first one that I go for because I have a lot of feelings about Capcom's arcade output of that era. But you're talking about getting dozens of games that to buy the individual boards would be a space consideration. Like that's the thing that I don't with you, man. I don't know how you have all those boards and have space for them, and how your wife doesn't want to light them on fire and pour the melted plastic down the gutter.
That's not too far from the truth, really.
Okay.
Except that when you sell a board and you make your big windfall, the wives do like that. And like all the money I spent on arcade boards, just selling off maybe the 10 or 15 that I have has paid for and then some everything I've ever spent on them, which is cool.
Yeah. Well,
that's my
nice.
Neo-Geo 4 slot, like I made a fortune off it, and I bought it for $40 shipped.
So
that kind of stuff.
Why are folks? This is a cul-de-sac that I don't want to spend a ton of time in. But like, why are folks so desirous of the 4 and 6 slots when it seems like most people want them to consoleize them? I don't know that I see the point in consoleizing a 4 slot.
I don't know. I got it because it was big and it looked cool, really.
Sure.
And it was cheap. I think if you want a cabinet and you want to have actual games on there, like here's 5 games.
Right.
You could have that plus 1 slot open if you had a 6 slot, but nowadays you're much more. And the other thing about the 4 and the 2 slots is they're much more complex boards. They're gigantic and they're loaded with components.
Yeah, and I've heard they're more prone to failure.
Yes. All the Neo Geo stuff is prone to failure, and the more components that are on there, the more chance you have of it. So that's why I also just like if my 1C breaks, I'm $50 away from another one. That's why I don't mind plugging this 161-in-1 into it. I'd never plug that into a 4 slot, for example.
Right. Yeah, because that was one of the ones that when Renee became the pariah of the community for a minute, Renee from DB Electronics, and said like flash carts may not be. His take was actually fairly tempered, and everybody took it way out of context and said that he was right. But his thing was the multi carts. He was like, even if you decide to use some of these flash carts, the like Chinese bootleg multi carts, do not use those. But like you said, if your MV1C blows because you used a 161-in-1 in it, then $45 or $50 later you've replaced it.
Yeah, I say that all the time. Is only if you're going to use the 161-in-1, only plug it into a 1C or 1B, because if something did happen to it, you're only out $35. You're not out $1,000.
Yeah.
And you're not damaging, historically important equipment or whatever.
Right. Well, there was a guy, I saw a guy on Twitter a few weeks ago who was I think actually Dan like retweeted him or quote tweeted him because this dude was like, I can't believe people are using this GBA consolizer. They're destroying important. And people are like, dude, it's like one of the best selling systems of all time. Like, there's a gazillion of them out there. And, it's like the same thing with these.
And they all have broken screens.
Right. That's the thing. And, like, it's like the people like that, I think, would be like, well, you're by consoleizing or whatever with these, selling off these components of the of these one slots or whatever, like you're destroying that, and it's like there's a gazillion Neo-Geo cabinets in the world that had these boards in them, and they're just going to end up in a landfill if people like us don't take them and do something with them or consolize them or whatever.
I was asking James from Gemination X about I was actually Brian Hargrove I was talking to about this. Like, how many one slots are there out there? Because there is an endless supply of these coming out of China, and they're not clones. They're real.
Right, they're
Most people
legit.
say, like, oh, they're clones. No, they're real SNK-made Neo-Geo 1 slots, 1B and 1Cs. Endlessly for 10 years now, they've been $30. So it's not like a new thing. It's like, where are all of these? Tian Feng said that they just had them everywhere. They had whole arcades full of MVSs and things like that, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of 1 slots.
Yeah, that's. I mean, so I think in a way it's an assist to the sort of preservation effort to be doing this, because, like I said, if people like us don't do something with them, consolize them, plug them into Superguns, they're going to end up in landfills. So. And
one cool thing about the multi-slots early on, before nice Superguns were around, is that they were a lot easier to consolize, because you can find the perfect one that has controller ports, a socketed BIOS, stereo audio, and a memory card. And then you're just like, oh, all I need is an RGB jack, and that's a console right there.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. So I think that's most of the talking points that I wanted to hit, but there were a couple things that you noted here. Explain to me what's an IGS PGM, because you made a note about that, and I don't know what that is.
PGM. So if you're interested in Neo-Geo, I actually have a video coming on this that's been editing for 2 weeks now, because I streamed with GC8 Tech, who's like the world authority on the IGS Poly Game Master, the PGM.
Okay. Oh, and, yeah, right.
I wanted to trim out the beginning of it, and it's 4K, and I have some video now with Porkchop Express that's taken a month. But anyways.
You'll get to it eventually.
Lots of people like to compare the PGM to the MVS because it's the same sort of system. Like, it was from the era where everything was going
modular.
Yeah, modular. So your games are carts. They look a lot like MVS carts. They plug in. This thing came out much later, 6 years after the Neo-Geo, so it's way more powerful. A little powerhouse. It's another one that you can get for dirt cheap, too. And then the games aren't that bad. You can get reproduction cave games like Escaluda, Dodonpachi Daiojo, Ketsui for about $100 each. And those are going to come down a little bit pretty soon. And if you're
how soon is Darksoft going to make a flash cart? That's the real.
I actually got my PGM originally because there was a rumor that he was going to make one, but he's not. Don't worry about that. Okay. What we're going to have first is Fluffy's making repro PCBs that will run the 3 cave games, and that will bring down the cost of the cave games a little bit.
Right.
And then GC8 Tech, Tim, is going to make a version of that can run all PGM games, including Demon Front and Martial Masters and the really desirable games. And once that happens, then you're pretty close to getting to multi-cart territory. But PGM is really cool. You get these cave games. The cheapest cave arcade game you're ever going to find is probably about $1,000 nowadays, to put that in perspective. So a PGM is really cool too. You could put that on your list maybe after you get all your other stuff.
Yeah.
It's an interesting curiosity.
Yeah.
It's like...
I do like shoot 'em ups, but I don't love bullet hells as much as I love the sort of classic style, know.
These are bullet hell era for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I'm familiar with Cave for sure.
Yeah.
So
you can try these out
cool.
They're all on the Xbox 360.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I have several of those on my 360.
You have everything basically that's great about Cave on your 360 for the most part. It's an incredible system.
Yeah. Actually, there was one other thing that I forgot to mention. So that we talked a little bit about, like, JAMMA has been the standard for quite some time. But when you're talking about arcade collecting and you're talking about, I want to start getting some stuff. Having a Supergun and having JAMMA and, my era and your era, I think we're the same age or very close. I was born in 82. So.
Yeah, we're very close then.
Okay. So. For me, it's mostly 90s arcade stuff. The second golden age, or maybe the silver age of the arcade with, like you said, X-Men, Street Fighter, NBA Jam, all the CPS2 stuff, Mortal Kombat 2. That stuff is the stuff that I really
we were there when that stuff happened. And it was a big cultural event.
Yes.
In the arcade every single time.
Yeah, I actually remember. Well, we'll get wistful in a minute because that was, I think we'll go through the chat stuff and then we'll sort of indulgently nostalgize for a little bit before we end things here. But when you talk about the original sort of golden age of the arcade, and actually I had. My dad bought a Ms. Pac-Man cabinet when I was a kid.
Cool.
He started his own business and he was relatively successful pretty early. And that eventually spun into, he's now in a completely different business. He used to own a gas station, which turned into just a garage that they serviced cars. They didn't pump gas anymore. Now he owns a restaurant, so figure that out. But anyways, but when he got the gas station and was doing relatively well, he really liked Ms. Pac-Man. And probably because of that, because I played so much of it, Ms. Pac-Man is of the golden age, of the original golden age, the classic arcade games. Ms. Pac-Man is my favorite classic arcade game, but that was before JAMMA, right? So if I want to get that game and use it on a Supergun, I have to get the class of 81 Ms. Pac-Man Galaga combo board, because that is JAMMA, correct?
Oh, no, you don't have to, but you could get that. It's pretty awesome if you did.
Right, but when did JAMMA, what's the
okay, so
point
JAMMA, I don't remember what year it is, but it's mostly like 1990s on-ish. I mean, there's earlier one. I think Turtles might be like 88. So it started.
It used to Double Dragon is 87 or 88. Yeah. So
and it's JAMMA. So it must have been around 86 or 87.
So when we talk about
until the late 90s.
Yeah. So when we talk about Frogger, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Ms. Pac-Man, Galaga, Galaxian, Gorf.
You can play those with the HAS really easily. What you need is a JAMMA adapter that's specific to the board.
Okay.
So I have a bunch of classic games. I have Dig Dug. I have 2 copies of Dig Dug. Plus then I have the Namco Classics Collection Volume 2, which is a JAMMA board that has Dig Dug 2, or Dig Dug and Arranged and some other stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know the one.
And you can get basically for any of those. And I have Pac-Man, Ms. Pac-Man, a bootleg that's an exact replica of the original board, but it is JAMMA too. And I have the speed up ROMs on there, which is pretty sweet.
That's the move. You got to have the speed up ROMs.
But if I had a real Ms. Pac, you can get for they're usually $20 to $30. It's just a JAMMA harness adapter. It'll take whatever the weird edge connector is on those classic games, and it'll give you a JAMMA output. Okay. And then you plug your HAS onto that. So you could still do Donkey Kong and all those, too, with the HAS.
Now, what happens with this is actually a question that just occurred to me, because I was thinking, it would be dope to... One of my favorite cabinet designs, which sort of defeats the purpose of playing on a Supergun, but one of my favorite cabinet designs of all time is Tron. Both Tron and Tron Discs of Tron or whatever, Tron Deadly Discs or whatever. The arcade version was different name than the home version, but whatever it was called, both of those cabinets are gorgeous cabinets. But I was thinking that has a spinner and a joystick and if you get a game that has a more specialized controller setup, or God forbid, Ridge Racer or Daytona, how does the HAS handle that?
With all of those,
or the minigun or whatever,
you're going to end up needing to do some sort of controller input dongle of some sort and getting a wheel, and that's a big ordeal.
It is a big ordeal. Okay.
Yeah, it will be.
The undamned standard doesn't read that automatically.
Help you with that, no.
Okay.
Because you'll end up having to find a really specific type of wheel, and you'll need to wire it in no matter what.
Okay.
So it is going to be hard with. There's spinners.
Right.
That'll plug into the JAMMA side and they go through the JAMMA port. But then even some spinners are really specialized, so it's going to be a case-by-case thing.
Okay.
And then, that's the early pre-JAMMA, but now we can also talk about the post-JAMMA really quick here.
Oh, sure.
Which is where you're on your own. But the HAS isn't going to help you that much when you get into JVS territory.
What are noteworthy titles?
Anything like Daytona 2 would be a good example.
So current stuff, or any of the Raw Thrills stuff, anything that's current.
That's HD. Basically, anything that's 480p or multi-sync of any kind, 24 or RJ48, whatever, VGA type connections, those, and when they start using really complex control schemes and things like that, then you're going to have to really start to specialize, and that's for people who are really further into the hobby. Naomi is that way.
Oh, I was going to ask about that. That would be the only thing that I would think.
Thanks, Jose. Jose.
Yeah.
And I'll show you one cool thing, though.
Please.
So, what you can do for some of those games, like I have, that's not it, Arcana Heart here. It's JAMMA, and it's modern. This is like 2006, I think. Mm-hmm. But then it has 480p video output on it that comes out through a VGA port. So with this, I actually can use the HES. And then I just run the VGA into an open source, into the OSSC or something, or straight into a VGA monitor or whatever. So there are exceptions. There are some modern games that are totally JAMMA still, and you just need to deal with the video, kind of. If that makes sense.
And so but you don't know off the top of your head what the final, you don't know what the final JAMMA release, you don't know what that is off the top of your head.
They still make them.
Oh, they do? Okay.
There was one I saw at Midwest Gaming Convention, a JAMMA shoot 'em up. I forget what it's called. I actually am killing myself over. One of them came up for sale for like $250 the other day, and it sold instantly. But I was like, man, I would have liked to have had that.
Yeah.
So they still make them, but yeah, it died out probably like 97, 98. It started transitioning to HD, and at that point, things went post JAMMA, really.
Yeah. So Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is Naomi, or is that CPS 3?
It's Naomi, I think. Yeah, Naomi 2, is that right? Yeah, something like that.
So CPS 3 is still JAMMA, though, right?
Yeah.
Not that there's a ton of CPS 3 games, but are Capcom's games that are pre CPS 1? Those are all JAMMA, right? Ghouls and Ghosts, Strider, the pre CPS 1 stuff.
I don't think
JAMMA.
I'm not sure exactly. Strider might be. I don't think Ghouls and Ghosts is, though. I think I've seen adapters for that.
Okay. Okay. Well,
this is where you should have Jose on the stream, because he knows all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, he said only 7 CPS 3 games, and that includes the second version of Third Strike.
Yeah.
So
it's an awesome system. I missed my chance to get one of those too, I feel like, because they're pretty expensive now.
He said he said that MVC 2 is Naomi 1, as is Capcom vs. SNK 2, which is a shame because Capcom vs. SNK 2 is actually my favorite 2D fighting game of all time, which basically makes it my favorite fighting game of all time. But
that's a good PlayStation 2 version.
So there is a very good PlayStation 2 version, yes, and I have it. There's also a good Dreamcast version, actually, but it was Japan only. But I have it, as we covered earlier, I have a GDMU, so it's fine. So I was going to kind of go through the chat here, if you're up for that. Unless you have anything else you want to say before we move into the chat and then move into just sort of getting nostalgic for a little while.
Real quick.
Oh yeah, right. Right. So
all this stuff.
Yeah.
Everything that we talked about is solved by this. That's it. That's all you need to know. Minigun, home arcade system, Sentinel, Parsec. Those Superguns solve this problem that we've talked about. If you like the golden age, which for me is the 1990s of arcade gaming.
Yes, same.
And even pre-golden age, really, because of those adapters that are out there.
So
it solves the problem.
So if I'm going to lay out to you, since we're recapping, I'm going to lay out to you my plan, and you tell me if I misunderstood anything you said, if I'm an idiot, if I misinterpreted something or didn't fully understand, because again, the whole point of this is that I don't know anything, and you're helping me to figure out how to go about fixing that lack of knowledge. So if let's start with, I think the minigun is probably good enough for me. I'm not sure that I'm incredibly obsessed about changing the button layouts and stuff.
It's good enough for everybody.
Okay, so if I get a minigun, we'll start with that. I get a minigun, I get a HAP 15-volt arcade power supply. Actually,
go with the Mindong.
Go with the Mindong,
because
okay.
It's exactly the same, essentially, except that GC8 Tech said the components in here are a little bit nicer. Okay. So I switched over to the Mindong now.
Okay.
But either one is fine.
So get the Mindong, get those blue caps for that stuff, and you screw that on, and then get the 3D printed cover so that my dog doesn't kill herself.
Protector.
Yeah. And then probably get a pacifier from QC Retro for the minigun so that it looks more like all the other things on my shelf.
Yeah.
A Genesis 2 SCART cable from either Retro Access or retrogamingcables.co.uk.
And get the one with the headphone jack on it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
They make that for the Sega CD or whatever.
Yeah.
Get that, because you'll need that for the audio.
Really? Okay.
Here. Yes.
Okay. So where does the audio come out on the? You just kind of showed it, but
It'll have like a headphone jack on it.
Okay, and you just use a male-to-male headphone sort of.
Or like on your most cables, you can get that one from the Genesis that just has the audio jack.
Oh, it does. Yeah, right. It just has the
to go into
male
the front
side.
headphone jack, and you just plug that in here.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's a hot tip. That's good to know. And then. Let's see, where was I? Oh, yeah,
it wouldn't hurt anything if you didn't have that, but that allows you to lose one more cable, going from the audio.
Right. And so then an undammed, what is it called? The USB key? It's just called USB?
USB decoder.
Decoder. Yeah. Undammed USB decoder so that I can use my joystick. Maybe a Neo-Geo CD controller because I like the clicky thumbstick.
I would actually recommend. I covered these for Retro RGB, but a guy, Magic Trashman, is taking the Neo-Geo mini controllers, and he modifies them to DB15, and then puts a clicky stick in them.
Yeah.
This is actually, I think, even nicer than the original controller, and it's way cheaper. So
really?
If you do one of these, yeah. I think the originals are like $100 to $200 nowadays, and they'll break on you.
Yikes!
So if you want to go with one of these, do this one.
Okay. How hard is the mod though?
It's very difficult. It's there's 3D printed parts, and he saws off half the PCB, and then he pad hacks it.
Oh, but he does it. He does it as a service, not just. Okay. I was gonna say I just told you I wouldn't like desolder the BIOS chip on a Neo Geo. There's no way I'm sawing a PCB in half and.
Or get even better, because this is a cool controller, but it's kind of a gimmick. The Saturn controller is actually a lot nicer than this.
Yeah, so I do love the Saturn pad.
The Saturn adapters are coming out pretty soon too, and they should be a lot cheaper. So that would be a good option.
All right, cool.
Do that.
And then I am going to want to get. So sorry, I'm actually going to backtrack a little bit here. Your case for the MV1B and MV1C is just that they are sort of cheap and readily available, and
super reliable. And like the MV1C is 1999, so you're talking 9 years into the Neo Geo. It was the last one.
Okay. But any of the one slots is like. Are there any of the one slots that you would say like, no, don't do that? That's a bad idea.
No, I love all one slots. I love all the Neo Geos, but I especially love the one slots.
None of them
I think that one day we might find out that those really big one slots have a lot better audio quality or something, because there's so much more going on them. Mm-hmm. All these capacitors, dozens of them, I think, on some of them. Like I recapped my 4 slot, and there must have been 30 caps on there, I think. Whereas on the 1 slot MV1C, there's like 4 left over after you've audio modded it. Yeah. So there's something different, but yeah, any of the 1 slots really are great.
So I'm gonna pull up your pre-made eBay searches here. Which one was that? So in your clickbaity titled $35 real Neo Geo, which one was the $35 board? That's the 1B. Okay.
And I do recommend another reason to go with the 1C. This is a stupid one, but the 1B sellers who do them for $35, they just drop it in a bag and ship it out of China with not a single piece of padding in there. I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
Where the 1C ones, they'll wrap some padding around it, and some of them even come in a box.
Yeah. See, the 1C, I feel like when I searched for the 1FZ, it was like the cost was basically, that's like the same price. It's like $55, and that's not the FS is the one that has the built-in stereo, right?
Yeah,
the
probably.
FS. So that's the one that one's probably more expensive if you want to not have to do a stereo mod, I'm guessing. No exact matches found, or there just aren't any. That's possible too, I guess.
Yeah. But any of those are great, really. I have my preferences, and I really like the way the 1B looks too. And I do think that there's something to having all of this extra components on there.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is huge. That thing will be 3 times the size of the little one slots.
Yeah. Well, that is a factor for sure. All right, so I'm going to go to the chat and just sort of look through what folks have been saying, and hoping that they're still around.
Yep.
So Rider Kickers said that they're working on doing an MVS constellation on their own, but the AD725 is a pain to solder. I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
They might be doing a digital video hack or something.
Oh, okay.
Digital video out of it. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
See, I'm out of the game. Digital stuff I haven't gotten to yet. I'm going to one day, but yeah, I'm still just analog.
Rider Kickers also wants to know, if we modify the Neo-Geo to work only with 5-volt, do we risk damaging the Supergun?
No. Because all you're doing when you modify that is you're basically turning off the audio circuit. And you don't need that amplification in the audio circuit just to grab your stereo audio. So you're not damaging anything. It's actually a smart thing to do. But if you're like me and you like to throw 12-volt LEDs all over your crap, you see, you look underneath anything that I own that has plexiglass and you start seeing LED strips on everything. Uh-huh. I need 12-volt to do that. So I can't disable 12-volt. See, I've got on my Hass here. They're everywhere in my house. Like everything has LED strips on it.
Does your car have lights under it too? Okay.
No. I just like, if I see plexiglass, I have to make diffused glow plexiglass out of it. It's the Tron thing.
Yeah. I got much love for Tron, so I get it.
And so if you disable the 12-volt on the Neo-Geo, then of course you can't put your LEDs on it.
I think we touched on this too, but Rider Kickers also asked, is there a Neo-Geo digital AV in development like the one for CPS2? That's the Tianfeng thing?
Yeah, there's
That's
some
what we're talking
instructions for that online. So I even have it under my PGM here. There's some LEDs. Yeah, but you do have to mess with the timing a little bit. You have to, like they said, I think Rider Kicker mentioned that you have to slightly overclock it to get it to 60 hertz.
Okay.
Or whatever.
Let's see here. Yeah, he did mention that.
So Ray Gink is saying that the Neo Micro, I said it's just for Neo Geo. It's not exactly just for Neo Geo. Like, I think it's going to work on the PGM. And anything that's like of that same video standard as the Neo Geo, which is quite a few boards, it'll work for any of those. So, okay. But it's just not like it's not doing the same thing that the Hass does to completely reconstruct the sync and the RGB for 100% of all JAMMA boards you'll ever find.
Right. Okay. QC Retro mentioned, I was asking the difference between the 1.5 and the 1.7. He said it doesn't have the same power adapter and the stereo is reversed.
Okay.
Which seems bad. I mean, I guess there's a way to fix that, but, he's working with Frank to update the design. But if the 1.7 has the proper stereo, then that's fine. There is an airplane very near you.
I am on the flight path. Yeah.
I
usually close on my windows, but it was warm in here.
That's all. It's fine. Like I said, I live across the street from. I'm actually surprised we only heard the one fire engine tonight the whole time we've been talking, because usually that's a thing. Mr. Python said that he just got an MV1C on your recommendation from eBay, and it looks good, but he needs to build the minigun to make sure. Illuminato joked about holding out and getting that new Neo-Geo Mini, whatever that thing is that they announced. They're making a new Neo-Geo of some sort, which I'm dubious until I see
the
something
Neo-Geo
in
Mini
action.
X, as I call it.
Or whatever, yeah. Thank you, Salcade, for the follow, and thank you, Unloved Homie, for the follow. Let's see here. Oh, he was actually talking about the Tianfeng thing, is when he said the Neo Mini. I guess that's the name of the Tianfeng thing.
Neo Micro, yeah.
Yeah, Neo Micro. But I want more than just Neo Geo, as we discussed, so I'm going to go with that. They Cruz Link 2 is talking, which is Jose, you said, right?
Jose Cruz.
Yeah, he's mentioning the Saturn similarities to the CPS2 board and the Saturn RAM cart.
So sane people, not people unlike us.
Not people like us, right? Yeah.
Should be totally fine with a Saturn for CPS2. Most of CPS2 stuff.
Right.
It's worth saying. And no one on Earth needs the STV. No one. I have it, but no one actually needs that.
What are we touched on that, but what are the noteworthy, like Die Hard Arcade is one that I saw.
Lots of stuff from the Saturn. It's just that the Saturn is 99.999% the same for this stuff. So all of those shoot 'em ups and everything.
G-Darius, Rayforce, Darius Gaiden. Those are all. Yeah. That's what
it is
Jose
a
was saying.
Essentially.
Right.
It's not like there's much difference. So no one needs an STV. Neo-Geo, everyone needs, of course.
Right. Yeah. So speaking of that, so then Jose had a bunch of stuff about we kind of talked about the Naomi stuff and the post JAMMA stuff.
And sane people don't need a Naomi either because the Dreamcast covers it pretty much.
The Adamus Wave stuff.
Thomas Wave is really cool, or Adamus Wave.
I'm not sure what's correct actually, but yeah, I mean, there's the Guilty Gear 4-player game was on that, right? And there's a King of Fighters game that was just on that, but that also got ported to the Xbox, the original Xbox, and I think that was like a fairly competent port, if I'm not mistaken.
And there's no multi for the Thomas Wave, which makes it expensive.
Yeah.
I was looking into buying Metal Slug 6 the other day, but I talked myself out of it.
Is that a Thomas Wave? That's not MVS?
Yeah, I think it's a Thomas Wave.
Okay. QC Retro said that they have 1 point. He did we determine the gender on QC Retro? I don't know that we
male.
Did.
I think he said
okay, he did. Okay. He said 1.7 is what he has on hand now. $120 for the minigun plus the case.
That's a really good price. And it's available. That's the amazing thing. That these things are available to buy once again. It was kind of like with Mr. Parts for a long time. They just didn't exist. Good Superguns are the same way right now.
Yeah. That's really the leaps and bounds that the Mr. Project has gone through since I built mine, last year it's crazy. But Reagan K says that was his Neo-Geo in the Tianfeng photo. So thanks for letting your Neo-Geo pose model for those photographs.
I do have a fun recommendation for you if you're just looking for some cheap boards to start out with.
Oh yeah, sure. Also, thanks to Jose is following the channel now, or the channel. I guess is it a channel on Mixer? We haven't been here long enough for me to know the answer to that, but thank you for following. At any rate.
So one cool system is you were in the arcade the same time I was, and you saw Tekkens come out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I maybe made the mistake of playing Tekken at that time once or twice, and you just get emasculated in front of a big audience really fast, and your 75 cents is just gone.
Right.
Okay. So I didn't play a lot of Tekken, but I watched a lot. It was the same way with a lot of the Street Fighter games and with Mortal Kombat. There was just too much competition for a little kid to get in there and play.
Yeah.
So the Tekken games are Namco System 11 and System 12, which is basically like a PlayStation 1.5, very powerful little board, and they're dirt cheap. You can find them really cheap, and a lot of the times they might just be missing a capacitor on the top, which even for someone like you, it's pretty easy to solder it back on. But you could get like Tekken 2 or Tekken 3 or Tekken Tag for less than $100, and those are really powerhouses of a game.
Yeah, Tekken 3 is fantastic. That's one case where I would actually like that board in order to do a video on it, because I actually would make the case that even though it's not as graphically impressive, I actually think the PS1 version it's just so feature rich that it's a better game, I think. But
a lot of people prefer the home ports of the Tekkens, and especially once you get into like Tekken 3 on the PlayStation 2, it's way higher resolution and stuff. But the arcade games, for how cheap that you can get them, I got mine all for basically the price of shipping because they were broken, and they were all just missing capacitors because the service mount capacitors, just you can shake them right off the board on these things. They're so poorly soldered on there. Even though they're really well made boards, the capacitors are just like, they just fall. I have forum threads of pictures where I was like, I'll just go on eBay right now and I'll show how many System 11 or System 12s are missing capacitors that you can buy and fix with a 1 cent part, you know. Mm-hmm. And I found like 10 or 15 at a time on eBay at that current moment.
All right. And that probably also includes stuff like Ridge Racer and Ridge Racer Revolution, but as we mentioned, you get into a weird spot of having to wire in a steering wheel with that.
And they're more expensive too.
Yeah.
The Tekkens are real common. Like Mr. Driller was on that same hardware, but it's very expensive.
That's unfortunate. Mr. Driller.
You could also get Soul Edge.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Is Soul Calibur Naomi, or was that?
Yeah.
It is, okay. Because I know the Dreamcast version looks a lot better.
Yes, I was on the route, I was on the path to looking into the Soul Calibur, and you look at some comparisons, and the Dreamcast really in that case did get the better version by leaps and bounds.
Yeah, and if you have, like, I played it on stream a few weeks ago, right after I did all my Dreamcast mods and stuff, and like, with the new SCART cables that tap into the VGA source video, the VGA video, and then output it through SCART, going into a FrameMeister, they just look like the Dreamcast version of Soul Calibur still looks fantastic. Like, it looks so good.
I love that era of 3D stuff. Yeah. Just looks so crispy and arcadey.
So now that was what I was going to ask, and I don't know if you have an answer for this, but that's another thing I forgot to make a note of or forgot to ask until now. I rely very heavily on Firebrand X for my FrameMeister. I don't believe he has any arcade profiles for the FrameMeister.
He doesn't, but there are some forum threads where people have them out there.
Okay.
And a lot of them, I just kind of eyeball it when I do it when I capture in data path, but there is a better way to do it, yeah.
Okay.
You can find the exact resolutions and things like that.
All right, cool.
I can point you to those forum threads.
Sweet. All right, so I think I got through my whole base plan, which is to get the minigun, the power supply, the 3D printed parts, the undammed USB key, and all that. Oh, actually, there was one other thing I wanted to ask. I think Bob just talked about it, and I don't remember who actually wrote the story, but somebody is 3D printing keys for the JAMMA connector.
Oh, yeah,
is that to prevent that was you? Is that to prevent putting them in upside down? Like what's
Yeah. Let's see. I have one right here. I just was looking into them and I was like, man, people are charging like $5 each for this little piece of plastic. So I asked if somebody could just design the key. And it's just this thing that you used to find on all the harnesses that prevents you from putting it in backwards. You're never going to do that with the Supergun, of course. Mm-hmm. But it is now like a 1 cent part, which is cool.
Nice.
So whoever you buy your Supergun from probably sells those for dirt cheap. But you don't necessarily need it. I went and put it on all of mine just because I got 10 of them for free.
Right.
And, I just put on every harness I could find.
Just in case. Just in case you come home drunk one night and are like, plug it in upside down.
Yeah. Or if I'm, into 3 hours into a long stream drinking beer.
What would happen if you plug it in upside down? Is it a thing where you do fry it? Okay, so
pretty sure if you plugged it in upside down, your 5 and your 12 volt would both be grounded on most setups, which would be Fireball Town.
Yikes. Okay. Jose says in the chat that I should buy a power cable with a built-in power switch.
Oh yeah, he linked to those I think a while ago. Because these don't have a power switch on them.
And the unit itself doesn't have a power switch. Okay. So it's like the Mister in that way. You just plug it in and it's on, and you unplug it to... Okay.
But they sell like power cables like for computers, for a few bucks that have a switch on them on the 110 volt side, and then you can just flip it on and off.
Yeah, so when I get the power supply, is it going to come with any kind of cord, or I need to get a cord that goes from...
I like to use those heavy-duty computer cables for the connecting to the wall, and that's just 3 terminals that you screw on. Your Supergun will come with the dongle for the power, and it'll be terminated on the one side either with like the Haas comes with just those little screw terminals that you just screw on here, and it'll show you, it's just a 5-second thing. You just unscrew it and screw it on and you're done. And then some of them, they'll all pretty much come with a power dongle that's basically designed for an arcade power supply.
So the power dongle goes from the unit to the power supply, and then I just need to get a cord that I strip the insulation, and then the 3-watt. Someone online, I feel like I've seen a video tutorial already where it says like this is the blue line or whatever. This goes to this screw and it goes here, and this goes here, and this goes here, and that's it. And then that plugs into the wall, and then we're done.
Yep.
Okay. So I think I'm feeling good about all that stuff. I appreciate, of course, your help and the help of the folks in the chat and the comments in the chat. So before we go, if you don't mind hanging out for a few more minutes, because I know at this point it's been 2.5 hours almost, which is like
I'm happy to be here.
A half hour at least longer than I thought we were going to go. But like I said, I want to know this stuff, and I want this video to be able to be used as a resource so that whenever someone is like, I'm dumb, I don't know about this stuff, I want to get started with this stuff, or I or anybody who is familiar with either one of us can just be like, oh, go watch this, because this is an idiot asking SmokeMonster questions for 2.5 hours about how all this stuff works. So
the nice thing is people don't really need to know nowadays. You can just know that the solution is the Supergun, but it's nice to actually understand how things are working, and that's what this video is all about.
Yeah,
so people can get the background on why things are the way they are,
and why don't use a laptop power supply and do use an actual arcade power supply, and why don't build your own Supergun, or why don't use an old,
or if you build your own, build the minigun.
Right.
That's what I say nowadays. Like the people who want to build their own, like the minigun should just end all other Supergun homemade designs now permanently.
So I mean, the thing now is that, again, I talked about all the stuff I'm going to get and all that, but to get into this stuff and to have a Neo-Geo, like the Arcade Omega, is that what it's called, Arcade Omega or whatever, the consoleized MVS that is sold from a seller in the United States, which is apparently a reasonably reliable, safe. It's not like the C box or whatever. It's
component output, so it puts a buffer between you and whatever's coming out. I believe it doesn't do RGB, or maybe it does. If it does do just RGB output, I don't really know if it's safe, honestly.
But my point is that's a $500-ish piece of equipment. Yeah. And even if you wanted to do what I'm talking about doing and what we just talked about for 2.5 hours, 120 for the minigun, 35, and that includes QC Retro in the chat said that includes the 3D printed enclosure.
Yeah.
$35 for the power supply, and anywhere from $35 to $60 for the MVS board. You're still at less than half of what the Omega CMVS or whatever is, and you're still even less than that Time Harvest C box from AliExpress, which has blown up people's equipment.
And you're way better than the Omega, because the Omega has like a really old Mac Strike sort of component thing in it, and that's another thing is I really highly recommend against any Superguns that have component output, because they have to use a really cheap circuit, basically, and they all look like total and complete garbage. I'm not trying to be mean to them or anything, but it's a really old. The Mac Strikes are garbage. What the better thing to do would be to use a home arcade system and use one of those $30 SCART 2-component transcoder boxes.
Yeah.
Beautiful picture going that route. And you're still, like you said, you're $300 in the bank when you're done.
Yeah, right. And so that was the thing that actually pushed me over the edge of going this route. Was I bought this board for WrestleFest, and then I was like, well, at this point, if I get a Supergun to play WrestleFest, because I didn't buy it to look at it, it's almost, I mean, it's hardly an additional investment to get into Neo-Geo stuff.
Yeah, it's really not. $35 and a 161, and you would have your whole setup from WrestleFest would work.
Yeah.
So like $50 to have 100 games for the Neo-Geo is not. Yeah, it's like incredibly good deal.
Yeah, and so I think now we'll kind of wind down a little bit, and you suggested, and I should have said something about this, but you suggested sort of a little reminiscing personal nostalgia tour about why would any reasonable person or sane person do all of this, or why are we into all of this? And I certainly don't want to come off like
let them eat cake.
Yes, yeah. Not at all. Like there are people I used to be, embarrassingly, and if you watch some of my early videos, which some people go back and watch and sometimes I watch them to I don't want to say I watch them to cringe at them, but I watch them to understand where I came from and where I've improved and where I can still improve. So I do watch my old videos like with I wouldn't want to say a large degree of frequency, but like maybe once or twice a year, I watch some of the really old ones, and just to understand how much in the 9 years.
All of my old ones offline to cover up my tracks, so that nobody can see.
Yeah, some people do that. I'm not going to do that. I mean,
yours are a reasonable size. Mine are 3-hour long streams of me being an idiot.
Well, that's fair enough, I guess. But I used to be a little let them eat cake about emulation, and I still don't love emulation generally. But
I'm okay with it.
But I mean, I'm saying for me, I don't love it. I
don't use it. Yeah.
But I think if people want to experience these games, and they want to, and for them, the easiest and most efficient way, is to fire up Kega Fusion, or whatever, Final Burn Alpha or Higen or whatever. Like, that's my thing is that if you have a system where some of these games are available, I think that there is an economic argument to be made that by paying $8 for a Neo-Geo game that you think is really cool incentivizes not only SNK but other publishers to make their games available for people on current hardware in a way that is functional. And I think that companies like Hamster and M2 do a really good job of making those games look good on modern hardware. But for me, in general, by and large, I like to play on original hardware because I like the feel of it. I like the sense of it. And emulation doesn't always get things right. A lot of times it doesn't get the sound right. Like MAME is an amazing, wonderful tool, and anybody who has an interest in this kind of stuff should watch Frank Cifaldi's 2 talks from Game Developers Conference. The first one was, I think, in 2016, and the second one was last year, about emulation and the challenges of selling old video games to people, and a lot of that stuff that I think is really interesting. And so I think, like, for me, just to bring it back to Frank Cifaldi specifically, I bought the limited edition SNK 40th collection for the Switch.
Mm-hmm.
Did I need...
That's a really good one.
Yeah, did I need that? Could I play those games on MAME? Sure. But this is a better emulator than MAME. Not that MAME is a bad... Again, as I just said, MAME is a fantastic tool. It's an amazing thing. The fact that it is a community-driven effort that is... I believe it's open source, right? The actual MAME emulator is open source. That has been going for almost 20 years at this point. Like,
it's the ultimate arcade preservation project.
Yes.
Too. So if you pull the software side out of it, it's just like every single one of these chips here on every single game I have is stored in MAME.
Yep.
And you can when you're repairing boards, you go to MAME to get the actual EEPROMs you're going to burn, and you put it back on the cart.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
So that stuff is all great, and I am not. And neither
MAME
of us
does a really good job with Neo-Geo, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it falters on a lot of things, but for Neo-Geo, it's pretty darn good, actually.
Also, I mean, so we've talked a little bit about how kind of old we are, and we're getting to the point of our personal reminiscence anyways, but like, I remember when Nesticle came out.
Yeah, I do too. I was in high school then.
Yep.
Well, I found it at least, yeah.
Yeah. And Genesis, and Even what was the first Callus was a CPS-1 emulator that came out.
I wasn't playing CPS-1 back then, I don't think.
That was late 90s.
Yeah.
But, those things were deeply flawed. Like, Nesticle sucks. But at the time, it didn't suck. And especially if you were running solely on your memories, you didn't notice all the ways it sucked.
Yeah, at that time it was just like, wow, I can play these games without buying them. That was the main thing.
Yep.
Like, I can have every game on the system on my computer right now. It's insane.
Yeah. Which, of course, just led to you play games for 5 minutes and then go like, this sucks, and then you move to the next one, even though that game maybe didn't suck, but since you had so many games...
And actually, now that you mention it, like, even though those emulators were out there, we were still playing the real games at home on our consoles, so that says something, too.
Yeah. I mean, I still do.
Even if we didn't know why.
I have flash carts for a good number of my systems.
Yeah, but nowadays we're wise and we know why we do it. Like, back then, we just did it because it was instinctually better.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I don't begrudge anybody who uses emulation, but for me, there is a, for lack of a better term, there's a tactile sense of using the real controller and using the real hardware and the sound of the noisy PS1 CD drive and that stuff just is all kind of part of the experience. And I don't begrudge people who don't feel like that's necessary or don't care about using the proper control. I mean, I do a almost weekly live stream of Genesis games with my friend Eric, and he uses every time we do that, he uses emulation. He doesn't have a Genesis. He doesn't have a way to play Genesis games besides using an emulator, and he uses I think an Xbox One controller to do it, or a PS4 controller or something, and like that's works for him. That's fine. I know that he thinks I'm a little crazy, and that's probably true. But I'm also okay with that. And so, I don't know. But it's also, for me, I mean, I do have nostalgia for a lot of these things, but I really try not to just rest on that, especially when I talk about a game and talk about a game that I think is cool or a game that I think is interesting. I try to separate, like, maybe I played this game in the arcade when I was 13, and maybe I thought it was really cool then. But do I still think it's really cool now? Or is it just that I have a warm, fuzzy memory about it? And I try not to let those things...
I fight that too, trying to figure things out to see them how they really are.
And I mean, sometimes I will play a game just because I have warm, fuzzy memories of it, but I try to admit that. Like, I try to be like, yes, I still like GoldenEye. Do I think it's actually still a good first-person shooter by today's standards? No, absolutely not. But I
really warm fuzzy memories.
Yes, I have extremely warm fuzzy memories around GoldenEye on the N64. So actually, my N64 is not here right now. It is getting modded right now for RGB. So
nice.
I'm actually very excited about that. That is.
That'll be awesome.
That'll be great because I'm getting it with this switch to turn off the anti-aliasing, which is like that was more than anything was the reason that I sent it off to get the mod, because this video on an N64 actually looks pretty good, but it still looks blurry because you can't turn off the anti-aliasing. So
another cool thing that I like about buying this, especially arcade stuff, is that like this $35 or $40 Neo-Geo and a game. That thing cost like over $1,000 when it was new, and it had the most cutting-edge 2D technology, like that you could really, as a human being, that you would encounter outside of like film studios or whatever. Like, these things are monsters, far beyond what we had in consoles at the time. Like this thing would wipe the floor with any console that was out there, and yet you can buy it nowadays for a pretty good price. And even, I mean, the games are expensive though. There's no way around that. The games are stupid expensive.
But with a flash card or a 161-in-1, like that you're finding a way around that. And again, I realize that even talking about like this isn't that expensive compared to what it used to be, or this isn't that expensive compared to getting an Omega arcade system.
And really, even like the WWF WrestleFest that you bought, I bet you anything that was way upwards of $600-700 for when the arcades bought it. And even that one little board has more processing power on it than you take Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Master System and combine them all into one unit, and your WrestleFest is still probably more powerful.
Oh yeah, there was no. I mean, there were no console ports of that game at the time because, well, really ever. There were some microcomputer games that were very popular in Europe and some here, but mostly in Europe. They tried to use the graphical style in other WWF games, and it looks terrible. It looks like they traced it over it. And they dropped 1 million frames of animation, and it looks like garbage.
And even to this day, like Mister is showing us just how hard it is to emulate even the really old games correctly. Mm-hmm. And when you compare them to MAME, you see the big differences in them. And it's because when you're dealing, they don't look that powerful on your screen when you're seeing them, but when you consider that they're like 1987, 1986, 1985, like they were doing, and Popeye, for example, 1982. Mm-hmm. For it to be able to do that in 1982, it's like coming from 20 years in the future.
Right.
Well, maybe not 20, but
right. But it and the Neo-Geo, like, man, that system, the PS1 and the PS1 ports of those games, which that was, in a lot of ways a more powerful system than the Neo-Geo in some ways not, because some of those ports are bad. Like, they're not good, and they're supposed to be of games from a previous generation. The Saturn ports are better, but even some of the PS2 ports of Neo-Geo games don't run well. Has been
historically, it's only been recently that we got really good Neo-Geo ports.
Yeah,
SNK has always done a horrible, especially Xbox 360. Have you seen the Metal Slugs on there? The live versions are so bad.
Yeah, but now
horribly bad.
We got good ones. Yeah. We got good ones. Yeah, I actually shelled out for the limited run shock box of King of Fighters 97.
Arcade game porting is in a really good place right now.
Yeah.
Especially on the Switch and the PS4 especially.
Yeah.
Like, you're just spoiled is how I feel.
Absolutely. And people complain. They're like, well, the thing that I find really funny is during the Wii era, people were like, this virtual console is nonsense. They want to nickel and dime me for games that I got in these big bundles on the PS2. And then when Nintendo said they weren't going to do virtual consoles specifically anymore, now everybody's like, but I want to buy them a la carte. Why do I have to buy these collections now? And it's just like, come on. Like, make up your mind, like, I like the collection, and I like the work that Digital Eclipse is doing, like we touched on a little bit, just because it's such a curated experience. And Frank Cifaldi, the way he describes it is, he's like, I make coffee table books that people can play.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Which is because he's like nobody wants to play Munchmobile. Like, that's not a thing that people want to buy and play because it's not very good, but it's interesting. Mm-hmm. And it should be preserved because it's interesting for a variety of reasons. So that's, and yeah, like you said, Hamster did a really good job. It's interesting. I did a comparison on stream a few months ago of.
Oh, Undammed is here.
Oh, nice.
Muffin 918 is.
Oh, that's Undammed? Oh, nice.
Yeah. How's it going?
What's up, Undammed? So yeah, I don't know. What for you, aside from the novelty of having $1,000 piece of hardware that you paid $35 for, for you, why? Because I think a lot of people, there's a lot of different reasons. And for me lately, it's been that newer games are very time consuming by and large. So I've been spending a lot of time playing vintage games because it's less time consuming. But why still play classic games?
Yeah, that's it exactly. Is the way that I look at it is like, and I've said this about every single time a new generation comes out. It's like, man, I'm just getting caught up with 3 generations back. Like, there's, you know how many 360 games there are? Like, I have 500 on my 360, and I've played maybe 5% of them.
Right.
And I mean, like, that alone would be a lifetime.
Right. My Steam library is ridiculous,
And so it's like, and I love that the 2D 8, 16, and 32-bit era. The sprite work and all of that kind of stuff is just off the charts. And I just feel like I'm catching up with it. And arcade games are a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Because these are games that, unless you're going to Galloping Ghost, you're not going to see them. You're just never in your whole life, unless you go out of your way, you're not going to encounter a lot of games in the wild.
And Galloping Ghost, I mean, anytime I'm in Chicago, I gotta go. I try to go semi-frequently when I'm back in the Midwest. My bachelor party was at Galloping Ghost.
Oh, that's awesome. I've been there twice.
It's
total.
I've been there 4 or 5 times at least now, and every time I go, they expand. And Doc is the nicest guy. Like you would look at him and you'd be like, he's like this muscular dude with long black hair, and he looks like he looks kind of like Peter Steele from Typo Negative, and you're like, I don't know. He's the nicest dude, one of the nicest people I've ever met. And I haven't had really, really extensive conversations with him, but like I went down there for my friend's birthday one year, and he said like, oh yeah, I'm here. Like we drove down from Milwaukee. It's my birthday, and I'm having he had this little tournament, which I won. And I'm going to say, Greg, if you're watching, I was never defeated for your birthday tournament. So anybody who claims to be the champion of your birthday outings is a pretender to the throne until they beat me and win Jammers. But he told Doc, hey, we came down and I'm doing this thing for my birthday. And he's like, oh, you're doing this tournament thing? He's like, I'll like give you some prizes. He gave me a free pass and he gave me a t-shirt, and he gave, like,
that's awesome.
Just like, because my friend Greg decided like, I want to have my birthday down there and do this silly tournament, multi-game tournament thing. And Doc is he's super nice. He showed us the space where he kept the games that didn't have room on the floor at that time, because that was before they had 2 spaces, and there was a space in the middle that they didn't have yet that they now do have. And so on the further down space, they just kept games they didn't have room for at the time, and he like showed us in there, and like, yeah, we want to get this up and running, this one we need to clean up, and this, that, and the other thing. And like,
that's cool.
Really great guy.
So you got the behind the scenes tour.
Yeah, we did. So yeah, but you're right. If you don't have access to the Fun Spot or the Galloping Ghost, you're just not going to see so much of this stuff. And even some of the stuff, even if you're collecting arcade boards and things like that, some arcade games are just so weird. You still have to go out to experience them.
Primal Rage 2. The only place you're ever going to see it is Galloping Ghost.
Well, but I'm hopefully someone they're not dumping it, or no one's going to dump it, or what? Do we know what the status is?
There's a special version of MAME now that you can play it on at home.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool.
I'm talking about stuff like Lucky and Wild. Like that does play in MAME, but like it's not the same experience, Yeah. Because the whole thing with Lucky and Wild is one person's driving and shooting a gun, and the other person is just shooting a gun, and you have to be racing and having the steering wheel in your hand and the pistol in your other hand and working the pedals. Yeah, if you're not,
it was you were in the actual vehicle, right?
Right. Yeah.
Arcade, yeah.
If you're not having that, like playing that on MAME is such a different experience than sitting in that cabinet and playing it.
Vectrex and Virtual Boy very strongly too, is that they get a bad rap because people aren't seeing it, or they are seeing it not well maintained or whatever. Like a crappy Vectrex or a Virtual Boy with blurry screens ruins it. Like to see them in their prime, really you start to understand like why they're so cool. Same thing with arcade games. And there's a big argument that these Superguns, for certain games, they do take away some of that. So I think that the real cabinet will always be like the primo way to do it.
Yes.
And setting up a cabinet in your home is not very hard either. And a Supergun is actually very helpful with. Like I basically have a cabinet here. I have a PVM 20-inch, 2030, and my arcade stick. And then I sit 2 inches from it and I play my game. It's very similar to a cabinet, except it would be more like a candy cab where I'm sitting down, I guess, here.
Yeah, I think for me, even if I was to get the CPS2, Darksoft kit and whenever I go to an arcade, and there are a handful here in Nashville, we've got No Quarter, which is mostly pinball, which is a whole other thing, right? Because there are pinball emulators that sort of do the physics and stuff, but I feel like that is way not the same thing.
No, pinballs are like Cadillacs, each one of them. Yeah.
And that's if I won the lottery, though. I would buy a Twilight Zone pinball table tomorrow.
See, my uncle has Doctor Who in his basement, and so I'm just like, that would have been the game that I would buy, but I don't really need to because I get to see it every, whatever Christmas is at their place. Yeah,
but I think that, or something like, you ever played a game called The First Funky Fighter?
Mm-mm.
It's a Taito arcade game, and the control panel is 9. It's a 3x3 buttons, big yellow buttons. And it's basically completely insane whack-a-mole, where on the screen you have there's different scenarios, different stages where different enemies come out. It's very similar to the shooting system in Snatcher, where it's like a grid of 9, 3x3.
Mm-hmm.
And in Snatcher, you move the D-pad to where you want to shoot, and things appear in one of the 9 spots, and you have to move the D-pad and hit the button. It's similar to that, but you have just a layout of 9 buttons, big, like, huge-ass buttons that you just beat the hell out of. And when the enemy pops out in one of the 9 positions on the screen, you beat up the corresponding button on the cabinet, and it's like Fist of the North Star. Like, it's not licensed, but it's like, as you're hitting it, you're seeing images of fists, like, in the spot that corresponds to the 9 buttons to the 9 segments of the screen. And that's all it is. That's the whole game, is you just beat up these 9 buttons in matching where the enemies are coming from. But it's so fun. It's so dumb, but it's so fun. And you have to be at the arcade to experience Lucky and Wild or the first Funky Fighter, or even, like we were touched on a little bit before, Tron. Like, because
Tron, yeah.
That had the black light, the black strip light in the cabinet that lights up the blue joystick, and like without that, that's part of the experience. But I still think that being able to play the games as they would exist in a cabinet, especially for stuff that's more like a lot of the CPS2 stuff, some of those cabinets were cool, but not Tron cool, and they're not weird.
Yeah,
like
it's more generic at that time.
Yeah, but I do think the bezel art is great. I do think that the control panels are cool, and I'm actually still mad, probably isn't the word, but this Capcom double joystick thing that they're selling, which apparently the parts in the joystick are very nice.
Yeah. It's very strange in that sense that they used really nice parts, but it just looks ridiculous, and it's not licensed.
Yeah, it looks ridiculous. And I'm like, why wouldn't you just make it look like the iconic Street Fighter 2 controls?
Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking with that.
Like, I don't want to play games on a giant Capcom logo. I want the classic old school Street Fighter 2 iconic control panel would have been perfect for that. And that's baffling to me that they didn't go with that direction, but whatever, I guess. But
nothing beats one of the coolest cabs that is, like, I really like those showcase cabinets, the really big blue, the big blue Capcom system with the gigantic monitor. Yeah. Which is where they would always put the newest CPS2 games in my arcade. So it would be Street Fighter Zero or Alpha, Street Fighter Alpha 2, and Marvel vs. Capcom.
Yeah, Namco had those too, didn't they? That had like the controls were like removed from the screen, and it had like a 35-inch monitor.
And there were generic ones too. Like they always had time killers on a huge one for like years at this Fun Factory I went to.
Mm-hmm. That game is bad.
It's bad now, but back then we were idiots enough that me and my friends thought it was really cool.
Well, you could
QC Retro still likes it a lot.
Yeah. You could slap all 5 of the buttons and do like an instant kill move, and that was the coolest thing about time killers. I think
it was a gimmicky game.
Giant Bomb played that on Ranking of Fighters a couple months ago, and they were like, "This is not good." I mean, it's not as bad.
It really looks like a bad Flash game nowadays, and there's so few frames of animation.
Yeah,
it's just poorly made.
So
I sold my time killers.
I had a chance. Did you say for quite a bit?
Yeah, so I got it broken, and then I gave it the full treatment. I recapped it. I put a rechargeable battery on there and put it on eBay, and it went for a pretty good amount, actually. It's not an expensive game, usually.
That makes me a little sad, because I went to an auction, because for a long time I wanted to have a cabinet. So when we lived in Wisconsin, there was this company that would come through, and they would do auctions of arcade games at the state fairgrounds in Milwaukee. Occasionally, about twice a year for a couple of years there. And so my wife and I would always go, because I was like, I kind of want to get a cabinet, and like I'm willing to shell out. Like I'd bid up a couple $100 on a 4-slot MVS at one point.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And stuff like that. But they had a Time Killers at one of those auctions, and nobody wanted it. Like, the guy was like, let's start the bidding at $100. Do I have $100? And you could hear a pin drop. And he was like, 75? Silence.
It could have been maybe, I don't know. I haven't look up the Time Killer's cab. It might have been a good generic JAMMA cab or something. But
yeah, I mean, it would have made for one, I'm sure, at the very least. And like, he finally started the bidding at I think $40, and like, I was kind of like, on the one hand, this is a really good deal, and like you said, like, it could be a decent JAMMA cabinet where I could get a different board and put it in there. But on the other hand, if I am going to buy one, because at the place we lived at that time, I would have estimated we had room for one. Like, I wanted it to be something that I thought was dope, and not like, because the Time Killer's cabinet is not super interesting. Like, the marquee has the Time Killers with the clock in the middle, like the broken clock in the middle, but then like, there's no side panel art, I don't think, at all. The control panel is not interesting. Like, it's just not, if part of it is a piece of furniture and a conversation piece, that was not the cabinet I wanted in my house. And so I was like, it's $50.
For me, like a Street Fighter cabinet would be kind of perfect. Although I kind of want an Astro City nowadays, or a Blast City. Yeah. It'd be a little more usable since it can do dual sync. But yeah, like if I was going to get a cab, which I'll never be allowed to have one because I've already blown out this whole apartment with junk.
Right.
But it would have to be something like you said, like I would throw down on it, like you throw down on a car kind of thing, like the one to rule them all. Yeah. Because it's a big piece of real estate too. Yeah. Yep. But yeah.
So let's wind this down because now we're pushing the 3-hour mark. So I'm gonna ask you before we go, what is, whether you have it or not, but what is, if you what is the one arcade game? What is like the grail? What is the game that sort of got you collecting arcade games that you're like, this is the one that I want to have?
The first game I ever got, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
The first one, not Turtles in Time.
I have Turtles in Time also. That was one of the early ones I got. But yeah, it was when I started collecting. I just said, I basically said, I'm going to get a Neo-Geo and Turtles, and that's it. Like, I wasn't planning on starting a big hobby. I was like, I had learned how RGB works, and then I kind of figured out that I could get a Neo-Geo setup going, and then I wanted to have Turtles. And then I started it was like, oh wait, now I have Turtles, I got to get X-Men. I have X-Men, I got to get Turtles 2. And I have Turtles, and then it just kept going until it's just like. And then with time, I learned how to repair things, and that opens up a lot of doors because I don't have a lot of money in this hobby compared to how much stuff I have. Because I buy everything broken. Like, I do not buy working things unless it's a miracle. Like, maybe 10% of what I have was bought working, and the rest was either untested or broken. Including that Turtles, and including my other Turtles, and including Turtles in Time, and X-Men had bad audio, and all this stuff. So, yeah, for me nowadays, it's just like I enjoy fixing it as much as I do playing the games, if not more. I love recapping things. I love getting in there, and it's like some people put together jigsaw puzzles. I like to repair arcadey stuff.
Sure. All right. Well, and then my second question then would be what. Given that it's very easy to have most of the Neo-Geo games at your fingertips, I assume you have access to all of them in one form or another. But what's your favorite Neo-Geo game, or one that you have like a strong memory or attachment to? I guess. Well,
the one I have the most memories of are the Metal Slugs, because those are the ones I played a lot in the arcades. In the arcades, I played. While everybody else was playing the new games, I played the quarter games because I didn't have much money, and it was a much better value. I could spend more time. And so there was one arcade where they had a few Neo Geos, and they always had Metal Slugs in them, and so I played a lot of those. And I played a lot of older games, so that's why I like this JAMMA stuff. It wasn't necessarily like Turtles was a quarter game by the time I was playing it.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And but my favorite Neo Geo game is probably Prehistoric Isle 2. Or maybe the two Aero Fighters games are really good too. If Prehistoric Isle 2 didn't have all the screaming, it would be definitely my favorite. But the screaming, where it grinds you down after a while.
Yeah, I can see that.
And you'll see what I mean if you play it. I actually pitched that to Digital Eclipse for their SNK collection. I said, could you please put an option in, like, disable screaming? I don't think that made it in.
No. Yeah.
How about you?
Neo, which? How about me? Which question?
Like, well, I know it got you into arcade collecting already.
Well, yes, because I told the story at the beginning. It's your fault.
WWF WrestleFest.
Yeah.
But like, what Neo-Geo games were you playing back then? Pizza Huts and places.
Yeah, I mean, I played anything I could get, anything that looked new, anything that looked interesting, almost anything I could get my hands on. You know, I was trying. There were 2 arcades near my house when I was a kid, and once I was about 12, my mom was fine. My parents were fine with me just kind of getting on my bike with my friends and sort of riding out. So, you know, I'm a big fan. I mean, I played a lot of fighting games because that was what was in at the time. Like, if we're talking about Neo-Geo, like the Neo-Geo game that I remember initially sort of making me realize how cool this thing was Fatal Fury 2.
Cool.
I played a lot of Fatal Fury 2 to the point that I understand that Fatal Fury Special is a better game, but I have more of an attachment to Fatal Fury 2 than Fatal Fury Special because I played so much of it when it was new that it just sort of ingrained itself in me in a way. And even Art of Fighting, which I also recognize the original Art of Fighting is bad. But the way those sprites scaled was so impressive at that time. And I really just, it's not a very good game. It's a very difficult game. And some of the mechanics are terrible with the whole thing of like, you use a special move and you have a meter that drains as you use your specials. But like just that first scene where Robert or Rio confronts Toto, the first guy that you fight, because the game had a story, right? That was part of it too. It was a fighting game that had this story of you picked one of 2 characters and then there was a narrative. Like Street Fighter 2, you picked anybody and then you fought everybody else. And at the end you got like a 30-second thing that told you what happened. But Art of Fighting had this narrative with it. And that first scene where, you know, Rio or Robert talks to Toto and then he blows you off and he does like one of his specials, his sort of power wave special, and you jump backwards and the camera pulls out. And I was like, whoa, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's a cool effect.
Which of course now that is not impressive in the slightest, right? No. But at the time
they love to use that effect too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
With good results.
Yeah. And I mean, I've said this before. I've said this in videos and I've said this in other streams, but like stuff like that, even like WWF Rage in the Cage on the Sega CD is a bad game. But if you were a wrestling fan and you were a kid who played video games at that time, when you put that disc in your Sega CD and you saw the video clips that were, you know, the screen is this big, the clip is this big, and it's like, you know, 10 frames per second, and it's like sepia toned because they couldn't use too many colors, but it's real video of Razor Ramon like doing the Razor's Edge. You were like, oh my God, the future is now, man. And the Neo-Geo was like that in a major way. I had a friend who...
I feel that way nowadays about when I play Wheel of Fortune on Sega CD.
Yeah.
I actually feel like I'm in the like a contestant on a TV show.
I don't have Wheel of Fortune on Sega CD, but I do have Jeopardy.
It's Wheel of Fortune is godlike experience. If you liked Wheel of Fortune,
I've always been more of a Jeopardy guy than a Wheel of Fortune guy. Like,
yeah, you probably are. You're more intellectual.
So sure, let's go with that. So you're the one with the master's degree in like anthropology. I just have a bachelor's in theater. I think you're the more intellectual one.
I don't know. I can fake it when I need to.
But
is Trebek in the Jeopardy game?
Yes.
I don't think I've played that. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Maybe I need to check that out.
There's full motion video of Trebek, but most of the questions are actually asked by Johnny Gilbert because it would have cost too much money to get Trebek to ask all the questions. I believe. I think that's the one but there's so many early CD-ROM Jeopardy games that I'm actually not 100% sure because I haven't played that one in so long, but I believe it's that one that Johnny Gilbert actually asks the questions. And then there's just a few random clips of Trebek, you know, introducing the categories and, you know, saying like, oh, sorry, that's incorrect and stuff like that. Like there's not a lot of Trebek, but he is in it.
The Wii and 360 have good Wheel of Fortunes, but they don't make me feel like I'm back in the TV show or something.
Right.
Getting ready to win a minivan.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but I had a friend who had two friends who were brothers. One of them was my age, and one of them was 5 years older than my friend and I. And they had a Neo-Geo AES.
Oh, cool.
Back in the day when it was like the games were new.
Imagine.
It was.
I don't even think I knew it existed.
Yeah,
in the little cornfield I was from.
Right, it was ridiculous. I mean, I would play games at the malt shop, or because I grew up in that kind of town that had a malt shop, or at the mall or whatever. Cool. And I would play those games, and then like I'd go over to my friend's house and we'd play those same games without having to plunk quarters into them. And I was like, this is ridiculous. This is totally crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But one of the games, like I was saying very early on, like I would kind of like to, I want to get some things that I think are cool in my collection. And I think there aren't very many Neo-Geo games that I would just get the game itself if I get a flash cart, because I'll have them on the flash cart, and I've bought several incarnations of various Neo-Geo games over the years. I don't feel like I'm doing anyone a disservice. I've paid for a lot of these games several times over.
Yeah, and your wife probably doesn't want you to take out a mortgage on her house.
Right. But one that I think I might go for would be 3 Count Bout, which I made a video on earlier this year. And it's not a great game.
Yeah, I don't think that's a very expensive one, is it?
I don't believe so. It's not a great game. But it's the only wrestling... So SNK only ever made 2 wrestling games, in spite of the fact that wrestling was extremely popular in Japan during the Neo Geo's tenure. It wasn't super popular in between the early 90s and the late 90s. Wrestling had a bit of a doldrums period in the United States, and it wasn't super, super popular between, especially, I would say, like 91 and 95 or 96, when the NWO debuted. Like, wrestling was not super hot in the US. But in Japan, like All Japan and New Japan was kind of on a descent, but All Japan was putting on just these crazy good matches. Wrestling was super hot in Japan. And it's weird that SNK only ever made 2 true wrestling games. You can argue that King of the Monsters is a wrestling game, but it is, but it's not.
More of a beat 'em up kind of, yeah.
Right, but I mean, you win by pinning the other monster. The first one, at least, you have to do a pinfall, and you can submit the other monster. But 3 Count Bout and Big Bang Pro Wrestling, which is actually one of the most expensive games I have, even though it wasn't that expensive. The weird thing about Big Bang Pro Wrestling for the Neo Geo Pocket Color is that a game of equal rarity on a system that anybody actually cared about would cost a minor fortune. But because nobody cares about the Neo Geo Pocket Color, and collecting for it is super cheap outside of like 3 games, basically, which are Mega Man, Card Fighters 2, and Big Bang Pro Wrestling. I got a complete copy of Big Bang Pro Wrestling, box, manual, everything, pretty good condition. And I think it was like $75, and maybe you can, like, it's maybe $100 now. But an equally rare game on a system that people cared about, that maybe wasn't a wrestling game, because that probably doesn't really help either, would be like a $400 game. But it's just that like nobody really cares about the Neo Geo Pocket Color. So even though this game is, in reality, if you like, in terms of like searching eBay, looking for people who have it and are trying to sell it or interested in selling it, like you will see
it's rarer than it's valued.
Yeah, it's rarer than Mega Man. It's rarer than Card Fighters 2. It's just that nobody
Here's something
cares.
really weird that you'll run into on that subject. You'll start seeing arcade games where the real arcade game is cheaper than what the cartridge will sell for nowadays. That's what'll really blow your mind.
That's weird.
Yeah. And you're thinking, some arcade games might have only a few thousand copies total, or 100, for certain games.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's crazy. So yeah, I think we can wrap it up unless you have any final thoughts about the state of vintage gaming, arcade stuff, Neo Geo, whatever you want to, or you should explain where people can find you on the internet, actually, is what you should do before we wrap up.
I've got a channel on YouTube. I'm SmokeMonster there. I'm also on Twitter, SmokeMonster TWI.
What is the TWI, by the way?
Twitter.
Oh, okay.
Somebody had already got... some lost fan already has the SmokeMonster account there.
Right.
But it also worked for my 3 days on Twitch, SmokeMonster TWI for Twitch.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't really, nobody watched me there, so I went back to YouTube with my tail between my legs.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. Well,
and everybody make sure to support Joe. I'm a patron of his. Get on the On The Stick Patreon.
Yeah. Patreon.com/on the
Can
stick.
people follow you here on Mixer too with money?
I haven't set it up, so I don't know how that works yet. I don't know.
Yeah, well, just join him as a patron.
Patreon is sort of my preferred revenue stream. I would like people to support me there, but I should set up the stuff like the one-time tips through something like Ko-fi or whatever, but I'm lazy about doing that. So, this video, this is going to be archived. So if you're watching the archive, you should subscribe to Joe on the Stick at Mixer. You should also subscribe to the main On the Stick channel on Mixer, which is where the Wednesday streams, I think, typically are going to live. But one thing that we like about Mixer is that you can co-stream. So I think, probably in the future, Mike and I, not Mike SmokeMonster, but MC Banjo Mike, who is regularly on the Wednesday streams, we're going to try to race some NES games and do some stuff like that, because the co-streaming thing on Mixer lets you have 2 stream windows on everybody's page. So whether they're watching,
that will be cool,
mine or Mike's, they'll see them both right there. So we think that's pretty cool. So subscribe to, both On the Stick and Joe on the Stick on Mixer, and subscribe to both. Right now, they're On the Stick and On the Stick TV on YouTube. Archive is going to go up on the Stick TV account, which is now just called On the Stick, and the original On the Stick channel is now called Same Name Different Game. That's where the produced, edited videos go. The live streams and stuff like this are going to go on the Stick TV channel, so subscribe to that as well. And thanks everybody for hanging out in the chat and watching. And if you're watching the archive, thanks for watching that. If you have any questions, you can get at SmokeMonster on Twitter, or at me. I'm on Twitter at Shake_well. And again, SmokeMonster, thank you so much for agreeing to do this and giving over 3+ hours of your Thursday evening to talk to me about arcade stuff. I thoroughly
enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. Yeah. I'll do this anytime you want. We can go 12 hours next time.
Awesome. Well, you know what? Next time I do a charity stream, I'll get you to come on for a little while and hang out.
Heck yeah.
So, or I actually do want to kind of do, now that the live streams are separated from the main YouTube channel. I say that sounds kind of jerkish to say main YouTube channel. The YouTube channel with more subscribers. I don't feel as apprehensive about posting 3 live streams in a week. Because there's been a lot of talk about you'll choke out your more produced content. The channel doesn't build in the same way. Blah blah blah. I don't want to bore anybody who's still watching with that stuff, but I'm less apprehensive about this. So I kind of want to have people on who aren't the normal 4 or 5 of us that are on every Wednesday. I'd like to have other people on just to talk about what they're into and that kind of stuff, and do stuff like this. So you're kind of the guinea pig with that, but I appreciate you doing it. I appreciate you informing me all this stuff. So now when I make these buying decisions, I know that I'm making good, sound decisions. And I hope that other people who find this video and watch it feel the same way and feel that they're a little better informed. And hopefully I'll put some time codes in the description so people can scrub a little easier than watching the whole 3 hours. But thank you again. And
thanks for having me, and welcome to the arcade hobby, and welcome everyone else to the arcade hobby. You're really close. If you know how RGB works, you've got 99% of what you need to know, really, now that the Superguns are so far along.
Yeah.
So